The October rain hammered against the windshield of Marcus Thorne's pickup truck as he navigated the winding mountain road back to his ranch. 3 years of drought had finally broken, but the storm arrived with a vengeance that threatened to wash away what little topsoil remained on his struggling cattle operation. The radio crackled with weather warnings and road closures, but Marcus pressed on through the darkness, his headlights cutting through sheets of water that seemed determined to drown the entire Colorado Valley. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 34, Marcus had spent the last 8 years running the Double T Ranch alone, ever since his father's heart attack had left him sole owner of 800 acres of increasingly worthless grazing land. The bank notices stuffed in his glove compartment told the story his pride refused to acknowledge. 6 months behind on the mortgage, cattle prices at rock bottom, and winter feed costs that would break him even if the weather cooperated. He'd already sold off half his herd just to keep the lights on, and the remaining 40 heads weren't enough to make the ranch profitable even in good times. The curve ahead materialized suddenly in his headlights, and Marcus downshifted to take. It's slow. That's when he saw her. A figure stumbled into the road, arms waving frantically, soaked to the bone and moving with the unsteady gait of someone who'd been walking for hours. Marcus hit the brakes hard, his truck sliding slightly on the wet asphalt before coming to a stop just feet from the woman, who now stood frozen in his headlights like a deer. She was young, maybe late 20s, with long dark hair plastered to her skull by the rain. Her clothes, a torn blue dress that might have been expensive once, clung to her thin frame, and even through the downpour Marcus could see that she was shivering violently. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They held a kind of desperate confusion that went beyond simple fear, as if she wasn't just scared but completely lost in a way that had nothing to do with geography. Marcus threw the truck into park and jumped out, instantly soaked by the driving rain. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" The woman backed away from him, her movements jerky and uncertain. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible over the storm. I don't know where I am. I can't remember ... double quotes. Can't remember what? How did you get here? She shook her head frantically, water flying from her hair. Anything. I can't remember anything. My name, where I came from, how long I've been walking. Her voice cracked with panic. There's nothing there. It's all just ... empty. Marcus had seen plenty of accidents on these mountain roads, usually tourists who took the curves too fast or didn't respect the weather. But this woman showed no signs of head trauma, no blood, no obvious injuries that would explain memory loss. Her confusion seemed deeper, more complete than anything a simple concussion would cause. Okay, he said, approaching her slowly with his hands raised. We need to get you out of this rain before you freeze to death. My ranch is just a few miles up the road. I can call for help from there. I don't know you, she said, backing further away. I don't know anyone. What if ... What if I'm running from something? What if I'm dangerous? The question struck Marcus as oddly self-aware for someone claiming complete memory loss, but the terror in her eyes was real enough. Ma'am, you're soaked through and half frozen. Whatever else might be wrong, you need shelter and dry clothes. We'll figure out the rest after we get you somewhere safe. Lightning split the sky overhead, illuminating the desolate landscape around them. They were completely alone on a road that saw maybe a dozen cars on a good day, surrounded by thousands of acres of empty wilderness. The nearest town was 30 miles away, and the nearest hospital was twice that distance on roads that were becoming more dangerous by the minute. The woman seemed to realize the same thing. She looked around at the darkness pressing in from all sides, then back at Marcus with a kind of resigned desperation. You could be anyone. You could be planning to hurt me. Yeah, I could be, Marcus admitted. But right now I'm the only option you've got. that doesn't involve dying of exposure on this road. And for what it's worth, I've got no interest in hurting anyone. I just want to get home to my ranch and wait out this storm." She studied his face in the truck's headlights, searching for something she could trust. Whatever she saw must have convinced her, because after a long moment she nodded. "I don't have a choice, do I?" "We always have choices," Marcus said gently. "But some choices are better than others." The drive to the ranch passed in tense silence. The woman Marcus had started thinking of her as Jane, until they learned her real name, sat pressed against the passenger door, watching the darkness outside as if expecting something to emerge from it. Every few minutes she would touch her temples and wince, as if trying to force memories that simply weren't there. "Any pain?" Marcus asked during one of these episodes. Not exactly painful. More like trying to remember a word that's right on the tip of your tongue, except it's my entire life. She looked at him with haunted eyes. How does someone just lose everything? Every memory, every connection, every piece of who they were. Marcus didn't have an answer. In his experience, most problems had practical solutions. Broken fences could be mended, sick cattle could be doctored, drought eventually ended. But a human mind that had somehow erased itself was beyond anything he'd ever encountered. The Double T's main house came into view as they crested the final hill, its windows glowing warmly against the storm. The two-story log structure had been built by Marcus's grandfather in the 1940s, designed to withstand whatever the Colorado mountains could throw at it. Tonight, it looked like exactly what it was, a solid refuge from the chaos outside. Marcus parked as close to the front porch as possible and turned to his passenger. "Ready to make a run for it?" Jane nodded, and they both bolted from the truck. Even the short distance to the porch left them both dripping on the hardwood floors of the entryway. Marcus grabbed towels from the linen closet while Jane stood motionless, taking in her surroundings with the careful attention of someone trying to determine if anything felt familiar. "Nothing?" Marcus asked, noticing her concentration. "Nothing," she confirmed. "It's a beautiful home, but it might as well be on another planet for all the recognition I feel." Marcus handed her a towel and gestured toward the living room, where a fire still crackled in the stone fireplace. "Let's get you warmed up, then we'll figure out what to do next." The living room was distinctly masculine leather furniture. Hunting prints on the walls, a gun rack by the window, but it was also comfortable and well-maintained. Jane settled into the chair closest to the fire, still clutching the towel around her shoulders. "I should call the sheriff," Marcus said, moving toward the phone. "Report finding you, see if anyone's filed a missing person report." "Wait," Jane's voice was sharp with sudden panic. What if whoever I'm running from is looking for me? What if calling the authorities leads them right to me?" Marcus paused with his hand on the phone. "You think you're running from someone? I don't know. But why else would I be alone on a mountain road in the middle of nowhere, with no memory and no identification? People don't just appear out of thin air." She wrapped the towel tighter around herself. "Something happened. To me. Something bad enough that my mind decided it was better to forget everything than to remember it." The logic was sound, even if it raised more questions than it answered. Marcus had read about trauma-induced amnesia, but only in the context of war veterans or abuse survivors. What could have happened to this woman that was so terrible her mind had simply shut down? "So what do you want to do?" he asked. Jane looked around the room again, her gaze lingering on the family photos scattered across the mantelpiece. "You live here alone?" "Yeah, been that way for 8 years now." "No wife? No girlfriend who's going to come home and find a strange woman in her house?" Marcus shook his head. "Just me and about 40 head of cattle that are probably huddled together somewhere trying to stay dry." For the first time since he'd found her, Jane smiled slightly. "A lonely rancher and a woman with no past. Sounds like the beginning of a bad country song." Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling back. Could be worse. Could be a good country song. Those are usually more depressing. The moment of levity faded quickly as the reality of their situation reasserted itself. Jane had no memory, no identification, no way of knowing who she was or where she belonged. For all they knew, she could be anyone, a missing person whose family was desperately searching for her, a criminal fleeing from justice, or simply someone who'd suffered a traumatic accident that had stolen her identity along with her memories. "I can't impose on you," Jane said finally. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I should call the authorities, go to a hospital, let them figure out who I am. And if someone dangerous is looking for you, if calling for help just tells them where to find you." Jane's hand went instinctively to her throat, as if checking for something that wasn't there. The gesture seemed unconscious, automatic, and it sent a chill down Marcus's spine. What had she been wearing around her neck that was important enough for her muscle memory to search for it, even when her mind couldn't remember? "I keep feeling like I should be afraid," she admitted. "Not just confused or lost, but genuinely terrified. Like there's something hunting me that I can't remember, but can't escape either." Marcus studied her face, noting the tension around her eyes, the way she kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting to see something threatening in the darkness outside. Every instinct told him to call the sheriff, to hand this problem over to people trained to deal with missing persons and potential crimes. But something else, maybe the loneliness of 8 years living alone, maybe simple human compassion, made him hesitate. "What if we wait?" he heard himself saying. "Just for a day or two. Give you time to see if any memories come back naturally before we involve the authorities." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jane looked at him with surprise. "You'd do that? Let a complete stranger stay in your house based on nothing more than a story about lost memories? The way I see it, you've got two choices. Trust me for a few days while you try to remember who you are, or trust a system that might lead whoever you're afraid of straight to you." Marcus settled into the chair across from her. "I'm not saying it's the smart choice, but it might be the safer one. And what do you get out of it? Why would you take that risk for someone you don't know?" Marcus considered the question. The honest answer was complicated, part loneliness, part curiosity, part the simple fact that he'd been drifting through life for so long that having a purpose, even a dangerous one, felt like waking up after a long sleep. But he wasn't ready to admit any of that to a stranger, even one who seemed to need his help as desperately as Jane did. "Maybe I'm just tired of being alone," he said instead. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the warm circle of firelight, two strangers began the delicate process of learning to trust each other. Neither of them could have imagined that this chance encounter would set in motion events that would threaten not just their safety, but their very lives. And neither could have predicted that the greatest danger wouldn't come from Jane's forgotten past, but from the moment when that past finally remembered her. The fire crackled and sparked, casting dancing shadows on the walls, while somewhere in the darkness beyond the windows, the first watchers took their positions around the ranch. The hunt for the woman with no memory had begun, even as she sat safe and warm, blissfully unaware that her hiding was almost over. But for now, in this moment suspended between past and future, Marcus Thorne and the woman who would take the name. Elena Martinez sat in comfortable silence, both of them choosing hope over fear, trust over suspicion, and neither of them knowing that tomorrow would bring the first hints of the terrible truth she'd fought so hard to forget. Dawn broke gray and sullen over the Double T Ranch, the storm having passed but leaving behind a world transformed by mud and standing water. Elena, she'd chosen the name during the long sleepless hours before sunrise, stood at the kitchen window watching Marcus wade through ankle-deep puddles to check on his cattle. She'd found clean clothes in what was obviously a guest room, jeans and a flannel shirt that belonged to someone smaller than Marcus. Though he'd offered no explanation about their origin, the clothes fit well enough, but wearing a stranger's belongings felt like another layer of disconnection from whoever she'd been before. Everything about her current existence was borrowed: the name, the clothes, even the roof over her head belonged to a man she'd known for less than 12 hours. The reflection in the window showed a woman who looked familiar but felt like a complete stranger. Marcus returned to the house stamping mud off his boots and carrying a thermos that had clearly seen better days. "Coffee's in the pot," he said without looking at her directly. "Help yourself to whatever you can find for breakfast. I've got to check the damage to the south pasture fence." Elena noticed he'd been careful to avoid her eyes since she'd emerged from the guest room that morning. The easy camaraderie of the previous night had evaporated with the sunrise, replaced by an awkwardness that neither of them seemed to know how to address. In daylight, their situation felt less like a rescue and more like an arrangement between strangers who had no idea what they'd gotten themselves into. "Marcus," she said as he headed for the door, "we should talk about this. About what happens next." He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "What's to talk about? You need time to remember. I offered you a place to stay. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple, and you know it." Elena moved away from the window to face him. "I could be anyone. I could be dangerous. I could be married with children who are terrified about where I am. I could be a criminal, running from the law." "Could be," Marcus agreed, finally meeting her eyes. "But you're not. How can you possibly know that?" Marcus studied her face for a long moment. "Because criminals don't usually worry about whether they're criminals. And mothers don't forget their children completely, no matter what kind of trauma they've been through. There'd be some instinct left, some fragment of recognition when the subject came up. But when I mentioned family last night, you showed no emotional response at all. Nothing." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "You were testing me?" "I was trying to understand what I was dealing with." Marcus's voice carried no apology. "This is my home, Elena. I've got a right to protect it and myself." The name sounded strange coming from him, foreign in a way that made her wonder if she'd chosen correctly. But then again, every name would sound strange to someone with no memory of ever being called anything. "And what's your conclusion, Detective Thorne? What am I dealing with?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Elena began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. "I think you're someone who got hurt badly enough that your mind decided forgetting was safer than remembering. I think you're scared of what you might have done or what might have been done to you. And I think you're a decent person trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation." "Based on what evidence?" "Based on the fact that you could have stolen my truck last night and disappeared while I was sleeping. But instead you stayed put and worried about whether you were imposing on me." Marcus opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "I'll be back in a couple hours. Make yourself at home." After he left, Elena found herself alone in a house that felt both welcoming and alien. The kitchen was clearly the heart of the home, large and well-equipped, but showing signs of a man who cooked for practicality rather than pleasure. The refrigerator contained the basics: eggs, milk, bacon, sandwich meat, and several casseroles that neighbors had obviously brought during some past crisis. She made coffee and scrambled eggs, moving through the motions with an efficiency that suggested muscle memory even if conscious memory was absent. The simple act of cooking felt natural, familiar in a way that gave her hope that not everything about her previous life had been erased. As she worked, fragments of sensation flickered at the edges of her consciousness: the smell of vanilla, the weight of a heavy wooden spoon, the sound of sizzling butter in a hot pan, but nothing concrete enough to grasp or build upon. The living room yielded more clues about Marcus than about herself. The books on his shelves ranged from technical manuals about cattle management to classic literature, suggesting an education that went beyond what was required for ranch work. Family photos showed 3 generations of Thorne men, all bearing the same strong jaw and serious eyes that Marcus possessed. In the most recent photos, a younger Marcus stood beside an older man who was clearly his father, both of them grinning with pride beside prize-winning bulls and blue ribbons. But there were gaps in the timeline that told their own story. No photos of Marcus with a wife or girlfriend, no feminine touches in the decoration, no signs that anyone else had ever made this house a shared home. The guest room where she'd slept was generic and impersonal, as if it had been prepared for visitors who never came. Elena was examining a shelf of horse racing trophies when she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. Through the front window, she could see a sheriff's department SUV making its way up the muddy ranch road, and her heart began to pound with a fear that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Marcus hadn't mentioned calling the authorities, and she felt a surge of betrayal that surprised her with its intensity. The deputy who emerged from the vehicle was a woman in her 40s with graying brown hair and the kind of alert expression that missed nothing. She knocked on the front door with professional courtesy, and Elena found herself frozen between the urge to hide and the knowledge that running would only make her look guilty of something. "Sheriff's Department," the woman called. "Looking for Marcus Thorne." Elena opened the door slowly, acutely aware of how she must look, a strange woman wearing borrowed clothes in a bachelor's house. "He's checking fence damage from the storm. Can I help you with something?" The deputy's eyes took in every detail with practiced efficiency. "I'm Deputy Sarah Chun, and you are?" "Elena Martinez." The name felt more natural this time, as if repetition was making it real. "I'm a friend of Marcus's." "I see. Well, Elena, I'm actually here about reports of a missing person. A woman in her late 20s, dark hair, last seen in this area yesterday evening during the storm." Deputy Chun's gaze never left Elena's face. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Elena's mouth went dry. Someone was looking for her, which meant someone knew she was missing. But were they looking because they were worried about her safety, or because they needed to find her for other reasons? The fear that had been lurking at the edges of her consciousness since the night before suddenly crystallized into sharp terror. What kind of missing person report? Elena managed to ask. The kind where concerned family members contact law enforcement when someone doesn't come home. Deputy Chun stepped closer to the door. "Mind if I come in? I'd like to ask you a few questions." Before Elena could respond, she heard the sound of Marcus's truck returning. Within minutes, he was striding across the muddy yard, with the purposeful gait of a man who owned every inch of ground he walked on. His expression was carefully neutral as he approached the porch, but Elena could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "Deputy Chun," Marcus said with a nod. "What brings you out here in this weather?" "Missing person case, Marcus. A woman named Victoria Ashford disappeared yesterday evening after leaving her hotel in Millfield. Her family's been calling every law enforcement agency in 3 counties. Deputy Chun's attention shifted between Marcus and Elena. "Her description matches your friend here pretty closely." Elena felt the world tilt slightly. Victoria Ashford. The name triggered nothing, no recognition, no emotional response. Not even the faint stirring of familiarity that she'd hoped would accompany her real identity. But the deputy's use of the past tense wasn't lost on her. If she was Victoria Ashford, then Elena Martinez was already lying. "Lots of women have dark hair and happen to be in their 20s, Marcus said carefully. "What makes you think Elena here has anything to do with your missing person?" "Well, for starters, the fact that you just called her Elena when the name I have for the missing woman is Victoria." Deputy Chen pulled out a small notebook. "Elena Martinez, you said. Can I see some identification?" The request hung in the air like a challenge. Elena looked at Marcus, trying to read some guidance in his expression, but his face had gone carefully blank. She was on her own, forced to make a choice between honesty and self-preservation without any real understanding of what either option might cost her. "I don't have any identification with me," Elena said finally. "I had an accident yesterday. Lost my purse, got turned around in the storm. Marcus found me on the road and offered me shelter." "What kind of accident?" Deputy Chun's pen was poised over her notebook. "I am not entirely sure. I hit my head, and things are a bit fuzzy. I remember walking in the rain, but not much before that." It wasn't entirely a lie, Elena reasoned. She had lost her memory, and she didn't remember how she'd ended up on that mountain road. The details about her purse and getting turned around were fabrications, but the core truth that she genuinely didn't know who she was or where she belonged remained intact. Deputy Chun made notes while studying Elena's face with professional skepticism. "Where were you staying before the accident?" "I don't remember." "Where were you heading?" "I don't remember that either." "Do you remember anything about your life before yesterday?" Elena met the deputy's eyes steadily. "Not much. Like I said, I hit my head pretty hard." The interrogation continued for another 20 minutes, with Deputy Chen asking increasingly specific questions that Elena couldn't answer without revealing the full extent of her memory loss. Marcus remained silent throughout, offering no help, but also no contradiction to her story. Finally, the deputy closed her notebook and fixed Elena with a hard stare. "Ms. Martinez, I'm going to need you to come with me to the station. We need to take your fingerprints and photograph, just to rule you out as our missing person. Standard procedure." "Is that necessary?" Marcus interjected. "She's clearly had a traumatic experience. Wouldn't it be better to let her recover a bit before putting her through an interrogation?" "This isn't an interrogation, Marcus. It's an investigation into a missing person case." Deputy Chun's tone brooked no argument. "And the sooner we can rule out possibilities, the sooner we can focus our search efforts where they'll do the most good." Elena felt trapped between competing fears. Going to the sheriff's station would mean official involvement, records, fingerprints. That might identify her as Victoria Ashford or as someone else entirely. But refusing to cooperate would only make her look guilty and suspicious, potentially bringing more unwanted attention to both herself and Marcus. "It's okay," she told Marcus, though her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. "I'll go. If it helps find this missing woman, then it's the right thing to do." The ride to the sheriff's station passed in tense silence. Elena sat in the back of the deputy's vehicle, separated from the front seat by a metal barrier that made her feel like a criminal even though she hadn't been arrested. Through the windows, she watched the landscape roll by mountains and forests that seemed both beautiful and threatening, as if hiding secrets she was better off not knowing. The sheriff's station in Millfield was a small brick building that served the entire county's law enforcement needs. Inside, Deputy Chen led Elena to a room with institutional furniture and fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and unforgiving. The fingerprinting process was efficient and impersonal, reducing Elena to a series of ink impressions on white cards that would be fed into databases across the country. Results should come back within a few hours, Deputy Chun explained as she photographed Elena from multiple angles. "If you're not Victoria Ashford, we'll know soon enough. If you are ... double quotes, she let the sentence hang unfinished. If I am Victoria Ashford, then what happens? Then we contact your family and let them know you're safe. They've been worried sick about you." Elena wanted to ask about the family, to learn something about the people who might be missing her, but she was afraid that too much curiosity would seem suspicious. Instead, she sat quietly in the uncomfortable chair and tried to prepare herself for whatever revelations the fingerprint results might bring. When Deputy Chun returned an hour later, her expression was unreadable. She sat down across from Elena and opened a manila folder that contained several documents and what appeared to be a driver's license photo. "Well, Elena," she said, "the good news is that you're not Victoria Ashford. The fingerprints don't match, and the facial recognition software confirms it. You're not our missing person." Elena felt a surge of relief so strong it was almost dizzying. "And the bad news?" Deputy Chun slid the driver's license photo across the table. "The bad news is that we still don't know who you are. Your fingerprints aren't in any of our databases, which means you've never been arrested, never worked for the government, never been in the military, and never applied for certain professional licenses. For all practical purposes, Elena Martinez doesn't exist." Elena stared at the photo of Victoria Ashford, a blonde woman with kind eyes and a nervous smile who looked nothing like her. Someone else was missing. Someone else's family was worried and afraid, and Elena was no closer to understanding her own identity than she'd been that morning. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now you're free to go. You're not a missing person, you're not wanted for any crimes, and you're not legally obligated to identify yourself to law enforcement, unless you're suspected of criminal activity." Deputy Chun gathered up the documents. "But Elena, if you truly don't remember who you are, you should consider seeking medical attention. Amnesia of the kind you're describing usually has serious underlying causes." An hour later, Elena found herself back at the Double T Ranch, sitting across from Marcus at his kitchen table while he processed everything Deputy Chen had told him about the fingerprint results. The relief of not being Victoria Ashford was tempered by the disturbing reality that she apparently had no official existence at all. "It's like I'm a ghost," Elena said, staring into her coffee cup. "No fingerprints on file anywhere, no criminal record, no government employment. How does someone live in modern America without leaving any trace in official databases?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe you lived off the grid. Cash jobs, no bank accounts, stayed out of the system deliberately. Or maybe someone worked very hard to erase my records." The possibility had been nagging at Elena since Deputy Chun had delivered the results. "Maybe someone wanted to make sure I couldn't be identified if I was found. That's a pretty paranoid way to think about it." "Is it? I show up on a mountain road with no memory, no identification, and apparently no official existence. Bizarre. I'm the victim of the most complete identity theft in history. Or someone very powerful wanted to make sure Elena Martinez, or whoever I really am, could never be traced back to them." The weight of that possibility settled between them like a third presence at the table. If Elena was right, then helping her wasn't just an act of kindness, it was potentially dangerous for both of them. And if she was wrong, then she was a woman whose paranoia might be a symptom of whatever trauma had stolen her memories in the first place. Outside, the afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds for the first time since the storm, casting long shadows across the muddy ranch yard. It should have felt like a new beginning, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in those shadows, someone was watching and waiting for her to remember something that they very much wanted her to forget. 2 weeks had passed since Elena's arrival at the Double T Ranch, and autumn was settling over the Colorado mountains with the kind of crisp beauty that made postcards and broke ranchers' hearts. The aspen trees had turned brilliant gold, their leaves catching the morning light like scattered coins, while the first frost warnings crackled across the radio each evening. For Marcus, it meant the urgent business of preparing for winter cutting hay, checking equipment, and making the hard decisions about which cattle to sell before feed costs devoured what little profit remained. Elena had insisted on helping with the work, despite Marcus's initial protests that ranch life was too dangerous for someone with no memory of how to handle livestock or machinery. But she'd proven surprisingly capable, moving through tasks with an instinctive competence that suggested a familiarity with hard physical labor. She could mend fence wire with steady hands, drive the old Ford tractor without grinding the gears, and had an uncanny ability to predict which direction spooked cattle would bolt. "You've done this before," Marcus observed as they worked together to separate a group of yearlings for market. Elena had positioned herself perfectly to block an escape route, anticipating the animal's behavior with the kind of timing that only came from experience. "Maybe," Elena replied, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her gloved hand. "Or maybe some things are just common sense when you pay attention." But Marcus had been watching her carefully over the past 2 weeks, cataloging the small signs that pointed to a past very different from the blank slate she presented. The way she automatically checked the weather each morning and could predict storm patterns by reading cloud formations. How she knew instinctively that the grain in the feed barn was developing mold before Marcus had noticed any visual signs. The casual expertise with which she'd repaired the temperamental water pump that had been giving him trouble for months. Most telling of all was her reaction to violence. When a rattlesnake had appeared near the barn 3 days earlier, Elena had dispatched it with a shovel strike so quick and precise that Marcus barely had time to register the threat. She'd shown no fear, no hesitation, just the kind of reflexive competence that spoke of someone who'd dealt with danger before and learned to act first and process emotions later. "Elena," Marcus said as they guided the cattle toward the loading pen, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." She glanced at him warily. "What kind of question?" "The kind that might help us figure out who you really are." Marcus secured the gate behind the last steer and turned to face her. "In the past 2 weeks, you've shown skills that most city people don't possess. You understand livestock, you know how to read weather patterns, you can fix mechanical problems that have been stumping me for months. That's not casual knowledge, that's the kind of expertise that comes from years of experience." Elena pulled off her work gloves and studied her hands as if they might reveal secrets she couldn't access. "I've been thinking the same thing. Sometimes I know how to do things before I consciously realize I know them. It's like my body remembers even when my mind doesn't." "So you think you grew up on a ranch?" "Maybe, or maybe I worked on one as an adult. There's definitely agricultural knowledge here somewhere." She tapped her temple with one finger. "But there are other things too. Things that don't fit the farm girl narrative." Marcus waited for her to elaborate, recognizing the careful way she was choosing her words. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd learned to read the subtle signs that indicated Elena was accessing some fragment of buried memory. The slight pause, the distant look in her eyes, the way her voice took on a different cadence, as if she were channeling someone else's personality. "What kind of things?" he asked gently. Elena walked over to the fence rail and leaned against it, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Yesterday, when that salesman came by trying to sell you insurance, I knew he was lying before he opened his mouth. Not just suspected, knew. I could read his body language, his micro-expressions, the way he positioned himself relative to the door. That's not normal social awareness, Marcus. That's training." The insurance salesman had indeed been pushy and dishonest, trying to oversell coverage that Marcus neither needed nor could afford. Elena had intervened with a few pointed questions that had sent the man packing within 10 minutes, his confident sales pitch crumbling under her quiet but relentless skepticism. "Training for what?" Marcus asked. "I don't know. But sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I have these flashes, images of faces, voices giving instructions about reading people, recognizing threats, blending into different social situations. It's all mixed up with other memories that might not even be real, but the training stuff feels different, more concrete." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Elena, are you telling me you think you might have been some kind of law enforcement officer? Or something else that required similar skills?" Elena's voice was steady, but he could see the fear in her eyes. "Marcus, what if I wasn't a victim? What if I was involved in something illegal? What if? The reason I can't remember is because I did things I couldn't live with. The question had been lurking beneath the surface of their growing relationship for days. Elena's competence and intelligence were undeniable, but so was the edge of hardness that sometimes surfaced when she thought no one was watching. She moved through the world with the kind of situational awareness that spoke of someone who'd learned to expect danger, and her comfort with isolation suggested a familiarity with secrets and deception. "Does it matter?" Marcus asked finally. Elena turned to stare at him. "How can you ask that? Of course it matters. You're harboring someone who might be a criminal, might be dangerous, might be a lot of things." Marcus interrupted. "But I know what you are right now today. You're someone who works harder than anyone I've ever met, who treats my animals with kindness, who fixes problems instead of creating them. You're someone who's been helping me save this ranch when you could have disappeared into the mountains weeks ago." The words hung in the air between them, carrying more emotional weight than either had expected. Over the past 2 weeks, their initial wariness had gradually given way to a comfortable partnership that neither wanted to examine too closely. Elena had brought life back to the ranch in ways that went beyond simple physical labor, her presence. In the kitchen each morning, the sound of humming as she worked, the way she'd started unconsciously planning improvements and modifications, as if she intended to stay permanently. "Marcus, you're not thinking clearly about this." Elena's voice carried a note of desperation. "I could be married. I could have children somewhere wondering what happened to their mother. I could be a fugitive from justice. You're letting your loneliness cloud your judgment. And you're letting your fear cloud yours." Marcus stepped closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Elena, in 2 weeks you've never once mentioned missing anyone. No phantom ache for a spouse, no maternal instincts. No sense of leaving behind people who need you. If you had a family, don't you think some part of you would remember that emotional connection?" Elena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it as she considered his words. It was true that she felt no sense of missing anyone, no pull toward any particular place or person. The amnesia seemed complete in a way that suggested either massive trauma or deliberate conditioning, neither of which painted a reassuring picture of her past. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something I haven't told you because I wasn't sure it was real." Marcus waited, recognizing the gravity in her tone. "I've been having dreams. Not memories exactly, but fragments of scenes. Always the same setting, a big house, expensive but cold. Lots of windows, but they're all covered with heavy curtains. And there's a man in a suit who never quite comes into focus, but his voice..." Elena shuddered. "His voice is the most terrifying thing I've ever heard, even though I can never remember what he says when I wake up. Nightmares can be products of anxiety rather than memory," Marcus offered, though he could see the conviction in her expression. "Maybe. But in the dreams, I'm always afraid. Not just scared, genuinely terrified in a way that feels too real to be imagination. And there's always the sense that I'm trapped, that no matter what I do or where I try to go, he can always find me." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Elena, have you considered the possibility that you didn't lose your memory in an accident? Maybe someone did this to you deliberately?" The question brought Elena's greatest fear into the open, the possibility that had been haunting her since her first night at the ranch. If her amnesia was artificially induced through drugs, hypnosis, or psychological torture, then whoever was responsible might still be looking for her. And if they found her, they might decide that Marcus had seen too much to be allowed to live. "I've considered it," she admitted. "And if it's true, then staying here is putting you in danger. I should leave, disappear completely before they track me down. Where would you go? You have no money, no identification, no support system. You'd be completely vulnerable to whoever might be hunting you. Better me vulnerable alone than both of us dead together." Marcus studied her face, reading the genuine concern for his safety in her expression. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd watched Alina transform from a terrified, disoriented woman into someone strong and capable, but the core of compassion that had drawn him to help her remained unchanged. She was willing to sacrifice her own safety to protect him, which told him more about her character than any recovered memory could. "Alina, I've got a proposition for you," he said finally. "What kind of proposition?" "Stay through the winter. Help me get the ranch ready for spring, and use the time to see if any more memories surface. If by spring you still don't know who you are, we'll figure out a way to build you a new identity legally. New social security number, birth certificate, driver's license, everything you need to start over." Alina stared at him in surprise. "You'd do that? Risk federal charges for identity fraud?" "I'd do it to help someone I care about build a real life instead of just surviving." Marcus felt his heart beating faster as he made the admission. "And I'd do it because I don't want you to leave." The honesty of the statement surprised them both. What had started as a temporary arrangement born of desperation had evolved into something neither had expected. Partnership that felt natural and right, despite its unconventional origins. Alina brought purpose and energy to Marcus's previously solitary existence, while he provided her with stability and safety in a world where she had no anchor points. "Marcus, you barely know me. You're talking about committing serious crimes to help someone who might not even be worth saving." "I know enough." Marcus reached out to touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know you wake up before dawn to start coffee because you've noticed I need caffeine before I can function. I know you've been putting aside money from the farm work to help with ranch expenses, even though I never asked you to. I know you sing while you work, and you always check on the animals before you check on yourself." Alina leaned into his touch, despite herself, drawn to the warmth and certainty in his voice. "And I know you read poetry, even though you pretend you only care about cattle prices. I know you keep your father's tools in perfect condition, because maintaining them is how you honor his memory. I know you're going broke trying to keep this ranch running, but you'd rather lose everything than sell to developers who would destroy the land." The recognition of how much they'd learned about each other in just 2 weeks created an intimacy that neither had anticipated. They'd been living and working together with the kind of natural rhythm that usually took couples years to develop, and the growing attraction between them was becoming impossible to ignore. "Alina," Marcus said softly, "I don't care who you used to be. I care about who you are now, who you choose to be going forward." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the afternoon air. Multiple engines moving fast, coming up the ranch road with the kind of purposeful urgency that meant trouble. Elena's entire body went rigid, her earlier fears crystallizing into immediate terror. "They found me," she whispered, her face going pale. "Oh God, Marcus, they found me." Through the dust cloud raised by the approaching vehicles, Marcus could make out 3 black SUVs with tinted windows, the kind of official-looking fleet that belonged to federal agencies or private security firms with unlimited budgets. They moved in formation, blocking all potential escape routes with military precision. "Get to the house," Marcus ordered, his voice carrying a note of command that Alina had never heard before. "Lock the doors, stay away from the windows, and if shooting starts, get to the storm cellar. I won't leave you to face this alone." "Yes, you will." Marcus was already moving toward the barn, where he kept his rifle. "Because if these people are here for you, then you're the only one who might know how to stop them. And if you're right about your training, then you're going to remember it real fast when your survival depends on it." As the SUVs pulled into the ranch yard and armed men began emerging from the vehicles, Alina felt something shift in her mind. A door opening that had been locked tight since the night Marcus found her on the mountain road. Images flashed through her consciousness like lightning strikes. Weapon training, escape procedures, surveillance techniques, and most importantly, the face of the man in the expensive suit who had haunted her dreams. Her name wasn't Elena Martinez. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chun, and she had stolen something that powerful people would kill to get back. Dr. Sarah Chun. The name hit Elena's consciousness like a physical blow, bringing with it a cascade of memories that had been locked away. For 3 weeks, she wasn't a ranch hand or a lost traveler. She was a neuroscientist specializing in memory manipulation, and the research data hidden in her subconscious was worth killing for. The armed men emerging from the black SUVs moved with military precision, establishing a perimeter around the ranch buildings while their leader, a tall man in expensive gray suit, approached the house with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Elena recognized him instantly now, Dr. Harrison Blackwood, director of Project Tabula Rasa, the classified government program that had consumed 3 years of her life before she discovered its true purpose. "Dr. Chun," Blackwood called across the yard, his voice carrying the same cold authority that had haunted her dreams. "I know you're here. We need to talk." Elena crouched behind the kitchen counter, her hands shaking as more memories flooded back. Project Tabula Rasa had been presented to her as groundbreaking research into treating PTSD and trauma-related disorders, a way to selectively erase traumatic memories while leaving the rest of a person's identity intact. What she discovered too late was that the government intended to use her research for interrogation and control, turning memory manipulation into a weapon against political dissidents and whistleblowers. Through the window, she could see Marcus emerging from the barn with his rifle, his face grim but determined. He had no idea what he was facing. These weren't ordinary criminals or even standard federal agents. Blackwood's people were part of a program so classified that it officially didn't exist, which meant they operated without oversight or accountability. "Marcus Thorne," Blackwood continued, his attention shifting to the rancher. "You've been harboring a fugitive from federal justice. Dr. Chun is wanted in connection with the theft of classified research materials. Surrender her peacefully, and you won't be charged as an accessory." "Don't know any Dr. Chun," Marcus called back, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. "Got a woman here named Elena Martinez, and she's not going anywhere without proper legal warrants." Blackwood smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Mr. Thorne, this is a matter of national security. We don't need warrants, and we don't need your cooperation. But I'm offering you the chance to walk away from this intact." Elena felt sick as more pieces of her memory clicked into place. 3 weeks ago, she'd been preparing to release evidence of Project Tabula Rasa to a congressional oversight committee when Blackwood had discovered her plans. The last thing she remembered clearly was meeting with investigative journalist David Walsh at a remote cabin to hand over the research files. Then nothing until she'd awakened on that mountain road with no memory of who she was or how she'd gotten there. They'd used her own research against her, erasing her memories of stealing the files while leaving her with just enough trauma-induced amnesia to make the memory loss seem natural. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed the files were hidden in a location she could remember and reveal under interrogation. In reality, she'd embedded the data using a technique she'd never shared with the project team, encoding it directly into her subconscious through a process that would only unlock under specific emotional triggers. The growing attraction she felt for Marcus, the sense of safety and belonging at the ranch, these positive emotions were slowly breaking down the barriers that protected the hidden information. Blackwood needed her alive and conscious to extract the data. But if he realized how much she was remembering, he'd resort to more extreme measures. "Mr. Thorne," one of Blackwood's men called out, "you have 30 seconds to send the woman out, or we're coming in to get her." Elena knew she couldn't let Marcus sacrifice himself for someone he'd known for only 2 weeks, especially when he didn't understand the full scope of what he was facing. She stood up slowly, her hands visible, and walked toward the front door. "Elena, don't," Marcus warned, but she was already stepping onto the porch. "It's all right, Marcus. I remember now." She looked directly at Blackwood, letting him see the recognition in her eyes. "Hello, Harrison. Still playing God with people's minds, I see." Blackwood's satisfaction was evident as he approached the porch, flanked by 2 armed operatives. "Dr. Sarah Chun, it's good to see you looking so well. The last few weeks must have been quite an adventure." "The last few weeks have been the most honest time I've had in years," Elena replied, acutely aware of Marcus standing behind her with his rifle still ready. "Too bad it has to end. It doesn't have to end badly. You have something that belongs to the United States government, and we simply want it back. Return the tabula rasa research files, and you'll be free to resume your life wherever you choose." Elena almost laughed at the transparent lie. "We both know I'd never be free. The moment you have those files, I become a liability too dangerous to leave alive. You're being paranoid, Doctor. The government has no interest in harming valuable scientific assets, like Dr. Patricia Vance, like Dr. Michael Torres, like the dozen other researchers who've conveniently disappeared after questioning the ethics of classified projects." Elena's voice carried a growing edge of anger as more memories surfaced. "I know what happened to them, Harrison. I know what you did." Marcus stepped forward, his rifle now trained on Blackwood, despite the obvious futility of the gesture. "Elena, what are you talking about? What research files?" "Memory manipulation technology," Elena explained without taking her eyes off Blackwood. "The ability to selectively erase or implant memories, turning human consciousness into something that can be edited like a computer file. I helped develop it thinking it would heal trauma victims. Instead, they want to use it to create perfect interrogation subjects and political assets. The applications are far broader than you realize." "Doctor," Blackwood said smoothly, "imagine the benefits eliminating PTSD in veterans, helping crime victims move past their trauma, giving people the ability to leave their worst experiences behind, and eliminating inconvenient witnesses to government crimes, and creating sleeper agents who don't know they're operatives, and erasing the memories of dissidents until they become compliant citizens." Elena's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I've seen the real applications, Harrison. I've seen what you did to the test subjects." The mention of test subjects triggered another wave of memories volunteers who'd been promised healing but instead became guinea pigs for increasingly invasive experiments. Some had lost years of their lives to selective memory erasure. Others had been implanted with false memories so convincing they'd testified against family members for crimes that never happened. A few had simply vanished when the experiments went wrong, their disappearances explained as voluntary departures from the program. "You're remembering," Blackwood observed with professional interest. "Excellent. The emotional triggers are working exactly as predicted. How much has come back?" "Enough to know that the files you want are beyond your reach." "Nothing is beyond our reach, Doctor. You should know that by now." Blackwood gestured to his men, who began moving closer to the porch. "Mr. Thorne, I strongly advise you to lower your weapon. You're outnumbered and outgunned." Marcus's response was to chamber around with deliberate loudness. "This is my property, and Elena is under my protection. You want her, you go through me." Elena felt her heart break at the simple declaration. Marcus was willing to die for someone he'd known for less than a month, someone whose real name he'd learned only minutes ago. The depth of his loyalty triggered something profound in her damaged psyche, surge of protective emotion that shattered the last barriers around her hidden memories. The files weren't just research data. They were a complete record of every illegal experiment, every cover-up, every murder committed in the name of Project Tabula Rasa. She'd encoded them using a revolutionary technique that stored information in the emotional centers of the brain, making the data accessible only when she felt genuine love and trust. The process had been her insurance policy, ensuring that the evidence could only be retrieved if she found someone worth protecting. "Harrison," Elena said quietly, "there's something you need to know about those files." "What about them?" "They're not hidden in some remote location. They're not stored on servers or encrypted drives. They're in here," she tapped her temple, "encoded directly into my neural pathways using a technique I developed but never shared. With the project team." Blackwood's confident expression flickered for the first time. "That's impossible. Memory encoding at that level would require a complete understanding of how emotional memory interacts with data storage, yes, which I have and you don't." Elena stepped down from the porch, moving closer to Blackwood despite Marcus's sharp warning. "The files can only be accessed through a specific emotional state, one that your interrogation methods could never replicate." "You're bluffing." "Am I? Then why haven't you found any trace of the stolen data in 3 weeks of searching? Why? Haven't your best technicians been able to crack my security protocols?" Elena's voice carried growing confidence as she realized the full implications of her memory recovery. "You need me willing and cooperative, Harrison. And that's the one thing you'll never have." Blackwood's mask of civilized authority began to slip, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Dr. Chun, you're making this unnecessarily difficult. We have ways of ensuring cooperation that don't require your consent, like the memory erasure you've already tried. That worked out well for you, didn't it?" Elena gestured to the ranch around them. "Instead of breaking me, you gave me exactly what I needed: time to heal, safety to remember, and someone worth protecting. Your own research proved that memory is tied to emotion, and you've just helped me create the strongest emotional bonds of my life." The standoff stretched taut as Blackwood processed the implications of Elena's revelation. If she was telling the truth about the neural encoding, then traditional interrogation would be useless. Worse, any attempt to force access to the files could trigger the same defense mechanisms that had created her amnesia in the first place, potentially destroying the data permanently. "There is another option," Blackwood said finally, his voice taking on a more dangerous tone. "If we can't extract the information from you, we can ensure that no one else ever gets access to it either." The threat was clear. If Blackwood couldn't have the files, he'd kill Elena to prevent them from ever being revealed. But as his men began to close in around the porch, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced since the night Marcus found her on the mountain road: complete clarity about who she was and what she needed to do. "Marcus," she said without turning around, "remember what I told you about that rattlesnake? About acting first and processing emotions later? Yeah. When I say go, take cover behind the water trough and stay down no matter what happens. Elena, what are you now?" Elena dove to the side as Marcus rolled behind the heavy metal trough, and the skills that had been dormant for 3 weeks suddenly roared back to life. She'd been more than just a researcher for Project Tabula Rasa. She'd been field-tested in combat situations, trained to survive in hostile environments where her knowledge made her a target. The amnesia had suppressed those abilities along with her memories, but now they returned with devastating clarity. The first operative reached the porch just as Elena came up with Marcus's dropped rifle. She put 2 rounds center mass before spinning to acquire the next target, her muscle memory guiding movements that her conscious mind was still struggling to process. Blackwood shouted orders as his remaining men scattered for cover, their carefully planned arrest turning into a firefight they hadn't expected. "Stay down," Elena called to Marcus as she moved to a better position behind the porch railing. "These people aren't law enforcement. They're assassins with government credentials." As bullets began flying in earnest across the ranch yard, Elena realized that her peaceful interlude at the Double T was over. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the simple life she'd built with Marcus. The only question now was whether either of them would survive long enough to find a way forward together. But as she returned fire with the precision of someone whose training had never really left her, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that she was fighting for something worth dying for. The files in her memory contained evidence that could bring down an entire network of illegal operations, but more importantly, they were the key to protecting the man who'd shown her what it meant to be truly safe. The war for her memories had begun, and Elena Chun intended to win it. The gunfight lasted less than 10 minutes, but it transformed the Double T Ranch from a peaceful mountain retreat into a war zone. Elena moved through the chaos with lethal precision, her recovered combat training allowing her to outmaneuver Blackwood's operatives despite being outnumbered 4-1. When the shooting finally stopped, 3 of his men lay dead in the ranch yard, and Blackwood himself nursed a bullet wound in his shoulder while taking cover behind one of the SUVs. "Dr. Chun," Blackwood called out, his earlier composure replaced by barely controlled rage. "You're only making this worse for yourself. Killing federal agents is a capital offense." "They're not federal agents," Elena replied from her position behind the barn wall. "They're contractors working for a program that doesn't officially exist. No badges, no oversight, no accountability. Just assassins with government paychecks." Marcus crawled over to where Elena had taken cover, his face pale but determined. "Are you hit?" "No, but we can't stay here. Blackwood's already calling for backup, and the next team won't be interested in taking me alive." Elena checked her remaining ammunition, 12 rounds left in the rifle, plus whatever Marcus had in his hunting pistol. Not nearly enough to hold off a larger force. "Where can we go?" "They've got vehicles, communications, probably air support on the way." Elena's mind raced through tactical options, her recovered memories providing knowledge she wished she didn't possess. "There's a network of abandoned mining tunnels about 2 miles north of here. Pre-World War, 2 silver mines that were sealed in the 60s. If we can reach them, we'll have defensible positions and multiple escape routes. And if we can't reach them, then we die here, and the evidence of what Project Tabula Rasa has been doing dies with us." The weight of that possibility hung between them as they prepared to make their escape. Elena wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was the only person alive who could prove that the government had been systematically murdering researchers and test subjects to protect a program that violated every ethical principle of human experimentation. "Marcus, I need you to understand something," Elena said as they gathered supplies for their flight into the mountains. "The files in my memory contain evidence of torture, murder, and human experimentation on American citizens. If Blackwood gets those files, he'll use them to identify and eliminate every witness, every victim's family member, every person who might pose a threat to the program." "How many people are we talking about? Hundreds, maybe thousands?" Elena's voice was heavy with the weight of recovered knowledge. "Project Tabula Rasa has been running for 8 years. They've had test subjects in every major city, recruiting from homeless populations, veterans hospitals, mental health facilities, anywhere they could find people who wouldn't be missed." Marcus stared at her in horror. "And you helped create this?" "I helped create the technology. I thought I was healing people." Elena's hands shook as she loaded extra ammunition into her pockets. "The memory manipulation process I developed was supposed to help trauma victims move past their worst experiences. Instead, they've been using it to erase inconvenient witnesses and create programmed assets who don't remember being recruited." "Elena," Blackwood's voice echoed across the ranch yard, "I'm going to give you one last chance to end this peacefully. Walk out with your hands up, and Mr. Thorne will be allowed to leave unharmed." "Don't believe him," Elena warned as she saw Marcus hesitate. "The moment he has what he wants, we're both dead. Men like Blackwood don't leave loose ends." As if to prove her point, the sound of approaching helicopters began to echo off the mountain walls. 2 military-style aircraft were converging on the ranch from the east, their rotors beating a rhythm that spoke of overwhelming force and zero intention of negotiation. "Time to go," Elena said grimly. They slipped out the back of the barn just as the helicopter swept over the main house, their searchlights turning the evening landscape into harsh daylight. Elena led Marcus up a game trail that wound through the aspen groves toward the higher elevations, moving with the kind of wilderness navigation skills that suggested extensive survival training. "How do you know these mountains so well?" Marcus asked as they climbed steadily through the darkening forest. "I don't, exactly. But part of my training involved rapid terrain assessment and route planning. I can read topographical features well, enough to find defensible positions." Elena paused to check their back trail, noting the absence of immediate pursuit. Blackwood's people are urban specialists. They'll be at a disadvantage in a rough country. Behind them, lights blazed throughout the ranch complex as the search teams established their base of operations. Elena could hear the distinctive whine of drone engines beginning patrol patterns, and she knew their head start wouldn't last long. Modern surveillance technology would make hiding nearly impossible once the full search got underway. "There," Elena pointed toward a rocky outcropping about half a mile ahead. "That's where the main mine entrance should be. If the old survey maps I'm remembering are accurate." "You remember survey maps?" "I remember everything now. Every classified briefing, every technical manual, every piece of intelligence I was cleared to access." Elena's voice carried a mixture of relief and dread. "The amnesia wasn't just blocking personal memories, it was suppressing my entire professional knowledge base. That's why they needed me alive and functional." As they approached the mining site, Elena felt another wave of recovered memories wash over her. The technique she'd used to encode the tabula rasa files hadn't just hidden them. It had created a complete backup of her consciousness, stored in neural pathways that could only be accessed through genuine emotional connection. The growing love she felt for Marcus had been the key that unlocked not just the files, but her entire identity. "Marcus, there's something else you need to know," she said as they reached the mine entrance. "The reason my memory came back so quickly, it's because of you." "What do you mean?" "The encoding process I used requires a specific neurochemical state to access the stored information. I had to feel genuinely safe, genuinely cared for, genuinely loved. The amnesia was designed to break down only when I found someone I could trust completely." Elena turned to face him in the moonlight. "You didn't just save my life that night on the road. You saved my sanity, my identity, everything that makes me who I am." Marcus reached out to touch her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Elena Sarah, whoever you are, I don't care about files or government conspiracies or any of it. I care about you. I know. And that's what makes this so hard." Elena leaned into his touch, memorizing the feeling of safety it provided. "Because what I have to do next might get us both killed." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching voices carried through the forest. Blackwood's team had found their trail and was moving up the mountain with professional efficiency. Elena quickly checked the mine entrance. The old wooden barriers had rotted away, leaving a dark opening that disappeared into the mountain's depths. "Inside," she ordered, pulling Marcus toward the tunnel. "And pray that the mine shafts are still stable after 60 years. The abandoned silver mine was a maze of intersecting tunnels that stretched deep into the mountain, carved by generations of miners who'd extracted wealth from the Colorado Rockies before the veins played out and the operation was abandoned. Elena led the way using the flashlight from Marcus's truck, her recovered technical knowledge allowing her to read the structural signs that indicated which passages were safe and which had been compromised by decades of neglect. "How far back do these tunnels go?" Marcus asked as they moved deeper into the mine. "According to the geological surveys, about 3 miles. Multiple levels, dozens of branching passages, several emergency exits." Elena paused at a junction to examine the support timbers. It's perfect for what we need to do, which is make our stand. Force Blackwood to come to us on our terms instead of his. Elena's voice carried a new hardness that Marcus had never heard before, and broadcast the tabula rasa files to every major news outlet simultaneously. Marcus stared at her in the flashlight beam. You can do that from here? Not here, but from the emergency communication station at the mine's deepest level. It was installed during the Cold War as part of the government's continuity of operations planning. Hardened electronics, satellite uplink, enough power to transmit globally. Elena's recovered memories were providing details she'd never consciously known. If it's still functional, I can upload the files directly to servers around the world. Every detail of Project Tabula Rasa, every illegal experiment, every murder they've committed. And if it's not functional, then we die here, and the truth dies with us. The deeper they penetrated into the mine, the more Elena's memories of the emergency station crystallized. She'd never been here before, but her security clearance had included detailed blueprints of dozens of similar facilities scattered throughout the American West, hidden command centers, designed to allow government operations to continue even in the event of nuclear war, most of them forgotten by everyone except the people who'd helped build them. There, Elena said as they reached a heavy steel door marked with radiation warnings and government seals. That's what we're looking for. The door was locked with a combination system that should have been impossible to crack, but Elena's recovered. Memories included override codes that had never been changed since the facility's construction. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot. Beyond the door lay a small chamber filled with electronic equipment. That looked like something from a science fiction movie. Banks of computers, communication arrays, power systems that hummed with quiet efficiency despite decades of abandonment. Emergency lighting activated automatically as they entered, bathing everything in an eerie blue glow. It's all still active, Marcus said in amazement. Automated systems designed to run indefinitely. The perfect insurance policy for a government that trusted no one. Elena moved to the main communication terminal and began the complex process of activating the satellite uplink. This is going to take about 15 minutes to establish a connection and upload the files. Can you hold them off that long? Where can we go? They've got vehicles, communications, probably air support on the way. Elena's mind raced through tactical options, her recovered memories providing knowledge she wished she didn't possess. There's a network of abandoned mining tunnels about 2 miles north of here. Pre-World War, 2 silver mines that were sealed in the 60s. If we can reach them, we'll have defensible positions and multiple escape routes. And if we can't reach them, then we die here, and the evidence of what Project Tabula Rasa has been doing dies with us. The weight of that possibility hung between them as they prepared to make their escape. Elena wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was the only person alive who could prove that the government had been systematically murdering researchers and test subjects to protect a program that violated every ethical principle of human experimentation. Marcus, I need you to understand something, Elena said as they gathered supplies for their flight into the mountains. The files in my memory contain evidence of torture, murder, and human experimentation on American citizens. If Blackwood gets those files, he'll use them to identify and eliminate every witness, every victim's family member, every person who might pose a threat to the program. How many people are we talking about? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Elena's voice was heavy with the weight of recovered knowledge. Project Tabula Rasa has been running for 8 years. They've had test subjects in every major city, recruiting from homeless populations, veterans hospitals, mental health facilities, anywhere they could find people who wouldn't be missed. Marcus stared at her in horror. And you helped create this? I helped create the technology. I thought I was healing people. Elena's hands shook as she loaded extra ammunition into her pockets. The memory manipulation process I developed was supposed to help trauma victims move past their worst experiences. Instead, they've been using it to erase inconvenient witnesses and create programmed assets who don't remember being recruited. Elena, Blackwood's voice echoed across the ranch yard. I'm going to give you one last chance to end this peacefully. Walk out with your hands up, and Mr. Thorne will be allowed to leave unharmed. Don't believe him, Elena warned as she saw Marcus hesitate. The moment he has what he wants, we're both dead. Men like Blackwood don't leave loose ends. As if to prove her point, the sound of approaching helicopters began to echo off the mountain walls. 2 military-style aircraft were converging on the ranch from the east, their rotors beating a rhythm that spoke of overwhelming force and zero intention of negotiation. Time to go, Elena said grimly. They slipped out the back of the barn just as the helicopter swept over the main house, their searchlights turning the evening landscape into harsh daylight. Elena led Marcus up a game trail that wound through the aspen groves toward the higher elevations, moving with the kind of wilderness navigation skills that suggested extensive survival training. How do you know these mountains so well? Marcus asked as they climbed steadily through the darkening forest. I don't, exactly. But part of my training involved rapid terrain assessment and route planning. I can read topographical features well. Enough to find defensible positions. Elena paused to check their back trail, noting the absence of immediate pursuit. Blackwood's people are urban specialists. They'll be at a disadvantage in a rough country. Behind them, lights blazed throughout the ranch complex as the search teams established their base of operations. Elena could hear the distinctive whine of drone engines beginning patrol patterns, and she knew their head start wouldn't last long. Modern surveillance technology would make hiding nearly impossible once the full search got underway. There, Elena pointed toward a rocky outcropping about half a mile ahead. That's where the main mine entrance should be. If the old survey maps I'm remembering are accurate. You remember survey maps? I remember everything now. Every classified briefing, every technical manual, every piece of intelligence I was cleared to access. Elena's voice carried a mixture of relief and dread. The amnesia wasn't just blocking personal memories, it was suppressing my entire professional knowledge base. That's why they needed me alive and functional. As they approached the mining site, Elena felt another wave of recovered memories wash over her. The technique she'd used to encode the tabula rasa files hadn't just hidden them. It had created a complete backup of her consciousness, stored in neural pathways that could only be accessed through genuine emotional connection. The growing love she felt for Marcus had been the key that unlocked not just the files, but her entire identity. Marcus, there's something else you need to know, she said as they reached the mine entrance. The reason my memory came back so completely, so quickly, it's because of you. What do you mean? The encoding process I used requires a specific neurochemical state to access the stored information. I had to feel genuinely safe, genuinely cared for, genuinely loved. The amnesia was designed to break down only when I found someone I could trust completely. Elena turned to face him in the moonlight. You didn't just save my life that night on the road. You saved my sanity, my identity, everything that makes me who I am. Marcus reached out to touch her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Elena Sarah, whoever you are, I don't care about files or government conspiracies or any of it. I care about you. I know. And that's what makes this so hard. Elena leaned into his touch, memorizing the feeling of safety it provided. Because what I have to do next might get us both killed. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching voices carried through the forest. Blackwood's team had found their trail and was moving up the mountain with professional efficiency. Elena quickly checked the mine entrance. The Old wooden barriers had rotted away, leaving a dark opening that disappeared into the mountain's depths. "Inside," she ordered, pulling Marcus toward the tunnel. "And pray that the mine shafts are still stable after 60 years. The abandoned silver mine was a maze of intersecting tunnels that stretched deep into the mountain, carved by generations of miners who'd extracted wealth from the Colorado Rockies before the veins played out and the operation was abandoned. Elena led the way using the flashlight from Marcus's truck, her recovered technical knowledge allowing her to read the structural signs that indicated which passages were safe and which had been compromised by decades of neglect. "How far back do these tunnels go?" Marcus asked as they moved deeper into the mine. "According to the geological surveys, about 3 miles. Multiple levels, dozens of branching passages, several emergency exits." Elena paused at a junction to examine the support timbers. "It's perfect for what we need to do, which is make our stand. Force Blackwood to come to us on our terms instead of his." Elena's voice carried a new hardness that Marcus had never heard before, and broadcast the tabula rasa files to every major news outlet simultaneously. Marcus stared at her in the flashlight beam. "You can do that from here?" "Not here, but from the emergency communication station at the mine's deepest level. It was installed during the Cold War as part of the government's continuity of operations planning. Hardened electronics, satellite uplink, enough power to transmit globally." Elena's recovered memories were providing details she'd never consciously known. "If it's still functional, I can upload the files directly to servers around the world. Every detail of Project Tabula Rasa, every illegal experiment, every murder they've committed. And if it's not functional, then we die here, and the truth dies with us." The deeper they penetrated into the mine, the more Elena's memories of the emergency station crystallized. She'd never been here before, but her security clearance had included detailed blueprints of dozens of similar facilities scattered throughout the American West, hidden command centers designed to allow government operations to continue even in the event of nuclear war, most of them forgotten by everyone except the people who'd helped build them. "There," Elena said as they reached a heavy steel door marked with radiation warnings and government seals. "That's what we're looking for." The door was locked with a combination system that should have been impossible to crack, but Elena's recovered memories included override codes that had never been changed since the facility's construction. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot. Beyond the door lay a small chamber filled with electronic equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Banks of computers, communication arrays, power systems that hummed with quiet efficiency despite decades of abandonment. Emergency lighting activated automatically as they entered, bathing everything in an eerie blue glow. "It's all still active," Marcus said in amazement. "Automated systems designed to run indefinitely. The perfect insurance policy for a government that trusted no one." Elena moved to the main communication terminal and began the complex process of activating the satellite uplink. "This is going to take about 15 minutes to establish a connection and upload the files. Can you hold them off that long?" Elena smiled for the first time since her memories had returned. "And I remember that my real name is Sarah Elena Chun. I was born in Colorado, about 50 miles from here. My parents owned a small ranch until I was 12, when they were killed in a car accident. I went to live with relatives in California, studied neuroscience, and got recruited by the government fresh out of graduate school." She touched Marcus's face gently. "I remember feeling homesick for these mountains every day for the past 15 years. I remember dreaming about coming back to ranch country and building a life that mattered. Federal agents." A voice called from the tunnel entrance. "Come out with your hands visible." Marcus and Elena emerged from the communication center to find themselves surrounded by FBI agents, congressional investigators, and journalists whose cameras captured every moment of their surrender. but instead of treating them as fugitives. The federal team leader, a serious woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Deputy Director Catherine Walsh, seemed more interested in protecting them than arresting them. "Dr. Chun," Walsh said as paramedics checked Elena's vital signs. "I'm Deputy Director Walsh, FBI Counterintelligence. We've been investigating Project Tabula Rasa for 3 years, based on reports from my brother David. He was the journalist you contacted before your disappearance." Elena's eyes widened. "David Walsh is your brother?" "Was my brother. He was killed in a car accident 2 days after meeting with you. The same kind of accident that's claimed a dozen other people who've tried to investigate classified memory research." Walsh's expression was grim but determined. "Thanks to the files you've released, we finally have enough evidence to prosecute everyone involved." Over the next several hours, as Elena underwent medical evaluation and gave her statement to federal investigators, the scope of Project Tabula Rasa's crimes became clear. The leaked files documented not just illegal experiments on American citizens, but an international network of memory manipulation programs operating in countries around the world. Governments fell, intelligence agencies were disbanded, and human rights organizations called for immediate intervention to protect the victims, who were still being held in secret facilities. Blackwood himself was captured attempting to flee the country, his private jet intercepted by federal marshals at a remote airstrip in Wyoming. The arrest was broadcast live on every major news network, along with footage of documents being seized from his personal residence and detailed explanations of the memory manipulation techniques that had been used on unwilling subjects. "How many people?" Elena asked Deputy Director Walsh as they watched the coverage from the medical facility where she was recovering from the neural interface procedure. "We're still counting, but preliminary investigations suggest at least 800 direct victims over the past 8 years. Probably thousands more if we include family members who were given false memories about their relatives' disappearances." Walsh's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much human suffering. "Your courage in exposing this has literally saved lives, Dr. Chen. What happens now?" Marcus asked. He hadn't left Elena's side since their rescue, and the FBI had made it clear that he was considered a hero rather than an accomplice. "Now we rebuild," Walsh replied. "The victims get the medical treatment and counseling they need. The perpetrators face justice, and the oversight mechanisms get put in place to prevent this from ever happening again." "And us?" Elena asked quietly. Walsh smiled for the first time since they'd met. "You're free to go wherever you want, do whatever you want. The government has offered you full witness protection if you're concerned about retaliation. But frankly, you're probably safer now as public figures than you would be hiding in the shadows." 3 months later, Elena stood on the porch of the rebuilt Double T Ranch, watching Marcus work with a small herd of horses in the corral he'd constructed where the gunfight had taken place. The ranch was profitable now, thanks to the book deals, movie rights, and speaking engagements that had followed their story's global coverage. But more importantly, it felt like home in a way that Elena's previous life never had. The Congressional Medal of Honor sat in a place of honor on the mantelpiece, awarded to both Elena and Marcus for their role in exposing one of the largest human rights violations in American history. Elena's Nobel Prize nomination for her work in memory science was still pending, but she'd already announced that any prize money would go toward establishing a foundation for Project Tabula Rasa's victims. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked as he joined her on the porch, sweaty and tired from working with the horses, but happier than she'd ever seen him. "About exposing Tabula Rasa? Never. About staying here instead of taking that position at Stanford." Elena leaned into his embrace, feeling the contentment that came from finally knowing exactly who she was and where she belonged. "Marcus, I spent 15 years trying to get back to these mountains. I'm not leaving again. Even though ranching is harder work than neuroscience, especially because it's harder work. But it's honest work, and it's ours. Elena gestured toward the valley spread out below them, where cattle grazed peacefully in meadows that would soon be green with spring grass. Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on you. Make sure you don't rescue any more mysterious women with amnesia. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing off the mountain walls like a promise of joy. I think I'll stick with the mysterious woman I've got. As the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd lost everything, her memory, her identity, her sense of safety in the world, only to discover that what she'd found was worth more than anything she'd given up. The woman who had stumbled onto a mountain road 3 months ago had been running from ghosts she couldn't remember. The woman who stood here now had faced those ghosts and emerged victorious, not just over the people who'd tried to destroy her, but over the fear and isolation that had defined her previous life. Project Tabula Rasa was finished, its architects in prison, its victims beginning the long process of healing. The memory manipulation technology that Elena had helped create would be banned by international treaty, its research files destroyed, except for the medical applications that could genuinely help trauma victims recover from their worst experiences. And in a small ranch house in the Colorado mountains, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest moment of their lives were building something that would last long after the headlines faded and the world moved on to other crises. Elena Chun had fought the ghosts she couldn't remember and won. But more importantly, she discovered that some things, love, trust, the choice to build rather than destroy, were worth any fight, no matter how desperate or dangerous. The war for her memories was over. The rest of her life was just beginning. 2 years after the fall of Project Tabula Rasa, Dr. Sarah Elena Chun stood before the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, addressing an assembly of representatives from 47 nations about the establishment of the International Memory Protection Protocols. The woman who had once lost everything to government-sponsored amnesia was now the world's leading advocate for cognitive liberty and the protection of human consciousness from unauthorized manipulation. Memory is not just personal history, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed assembly hall. It is the foundation of identity itself. When we allow governments or corporations to alter human memory without consent, we surrender the most fundamental aspect of what makes us human, our right to be ourselves. The protocol she was presenting would establish binding international law governing memory research, requiring informed consent for all neurological procedures, creating severe penalties for any government or organization that attempted to use memory manipulation for coercive purposes. It was the culmination of 2 years of legal battles, scientific research, and political negotiation that had transformed Elena from a fugitive scientist into a global human rights advocate. In the gallery above the assembly floor, Marcus watched, his wife with the kind of pride that came from witnessing someone find their true calling. The rancher who had once struggled to keep a small cattle operation afloat was now the CEO of Thorn Chen Technologies, a biotechnology company that specialized in ethical memory research and trauma treatment. Their work had helped thousands of Project Tabula Rasa victims recover their stolen memories while developing safeguards to prevent such abuses from ever happening again. The Double T Ranch had evolved as well, transforming from a struggling cattle operation into a research facility and rehabilitation center where victims of memory manipulation could recover in safety while contributing to the development of protective technologies. The mountain valley that had once been isolated from the world now hosted scientists, human rights advocates, and survivors from dozens of countries, all working together to ensure that the horrors of Tabula Rasa would never be repeated. As Elena concluded her presentation to thunderous applause, Marcus's attention was drawn to a familiar figure in the diplomatic gallery. Deputy Director Catherine Walsh, now heading the FBI's new Cognitive Crimes Division, caught his eye and nodded toward the exit. They had arranged to meet after Alana's speech to discuss the latest developments in the ongoing prosecutions of tabula rasa personnel. How did it go? Alina asked as she joined Marcus and Catherine in a private conference room adjacent to the assembly hall. Unanimous approval for the protocols, Catherine reported with satisfaction. The vote was 47-0, with implementation beginning immediately. As of today, memory manipulation without informed consent is officially classified as a crime against humanity under international law. Elena sank into a chair, the weight of 2 years of advocacy work finally lifting from her shoulders. It's really over then. The legal framework is in place. The legal framework, yes. But enforcement is going to be the real challenge. Catherine pulled out a tablet displaying global intelligence reports. We've identified at least 12 countries that were running programs similar to tabula rasa, and shutting them down has been complicated. Marcus leaned forward, his expression growing serious. What kind of complications? The kind where governments claim the programs never existed, evidence mysteriously disappears, and key witnesses suffer convenient accidents. Catherine's voice carried the frustration of someone fighting an uphill battle against institutional inertia. The Chinese operation in Xinjiang, the Russian facility in Siberia, the private contractors working for various African dictatorships, they're all claiming diplomatic immunity or national security exemptions. Elena felt a familiar chill of recognition. Even with international law on their side, the forces that had created Project Tabula Rasa were still operating in shadows around the world. The difference now was that their activities could no longer be hidden from public scrutiny, and the victims had legal recourse for seeking justice. What about the technology itself? Elena asked. Have we been able to verify that the research materials were actually destroyed? Officially, yes. Every government that admitted to having memory manipulation programs has provided documentation showing complete destruction of research materials. Catherine paused meaningfully. Unofficially, we know that's impossible. This kind of technology doesn't just disappear, it evolves, adapts, finds new applications. The sobering reality was that Elena's breakthrough research in memory encoding had opened a door that could never be completely closed. While the international memory protection protocols would prevent legitimate governments from using the technology for coercive purposes, there was no way to prevent criminal organizations, terrorist groups, or rogue states from developing their own versions of memory manipulation techniques. Which brings me to why I wanted to meet with you today, Catherine continued. The UN is establishing a new organization, the International Cognitive Security Agency, to monitor compliance with the memory protection protocols and investigate violations. They've asked me to recommend candidates for director. Elena immediately understood where the conversation was heading. Catherine, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm not interested in returning to government work. What Marcus and I have built at the ranch, the research, the rehabilitation programs, the advocacy work, it's making a real difference. I wasn't going to recommend you for director, Catherine said with a slight smile. I was going to recommend you both for the oversight board. The ICSA needs people who understand the technology, who have survived its abuse, and who have demonstrated the courage to fight for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Marcus exchanged a glance with Elena, reading the mixture of interest and apprehension in her expression. The past 2 years had been the most peaceful and productive of either of their lives, but they both understood that their unique experience with memory manipulation gave them responsibilities that extended beyond their personal happiness. What would it involve? Marcus asked. Quarterly meetings in Geneva, review of investigation reports, approval of research protocols, and occasional field work when serious violations are suspected. Catherine leaned back in her chair. The position would allow you to maintain your current work while ensuring that the international community has access to your expertise when it's needed. Elena was quiet for a long moment, weighing the implications of the offer. Taking the position would mean regular travel, exposure to ongoing dangers, and the constant reminder of the trauma she had survived. But it would also mean the ability to directly influence global policy and prevent other victims from suffering as she had. Can we think about it? Elena asked finally. Of course. The ICSA won't be fully operational for another 6 months anyway. Catherine gathered her materials and prepared to leave. But Elena, there's something else you should know. The rehabilitation work you've been doing at the ranch, it's being studied by medical schools around the world. Your integration therapy protocols are becoming the global standard for treating memory trauma. After Catherine left, Elena and Marcus walked through the streets of Geneva in comfortable silence, processing the weight of the decision they faced. The city around them bustled with the energy of international diplomacy, a constant reminder that their personal story had become part of a larger global narrative about human rights and technological responsibility. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked as they paused beside Lake Geneva, watching the famous water fountain rise into the evening sky. "I'm thinking about that woman on the mountain road 2 years ago," Elena replied. "She was so lost, so afraid, so convinced that she had nothing left to offer the world. And now," she gestured toward the UN building where she had just addressed world leaders about protecting human consciousness. "It's surreal sometimes. You earned this, Elena. Every recognition, every platform, every opportunity to make a difference. You earned it by refusing to let them break you." Elena leaned against the railing overlooking the lake, her mind drifting back to the moments that had defined her transformation, the terror of waking up with no memory, the kindness of a stranger who had offered shelter without asking questions, the gradual realization that love could heal wounds that seemed permanent, the courage to fight for something larger than personal survival. "Marcus, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that night?" "No," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Because thinking about that possibility is like imagining a world without light. Some things are too fundamental to question." Elena smiled, remembering the wooden robin that still sat on their mantelpiece. At home, the first gift Marcus had carved for her, during those early days when neither of them had understood what they were building together. The simple wooden bird had become a symbol of hope emerging from darkness, of beauty created from broken pieces. "I want to take the position," Elena said suddenly. "Not because I feel obligated, but because I want to. The work we're doing matters, but it's not enough if we're only helping the victims who can find us. There are people suffering in secret facilities around the world right now, and they deserve to know that someone is fighting for them." Marcus nodded, having reached the same conclusion himself. "Then we take it. Together." "Together," Elena agreed. 3 Days later, they returned to Colorado to find the Double T Ranch bustling with activity. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, Elena's former graduate student who now directed the day-to-day operations of the rehabilitation center, had news that would reshape their understanding of memory manipulation technology once again. "We've had a breakthrough with the neural mapping project," Jennifer reported as she led them through the expanded research facility that now occupied what had once been the ranch's hay barn. "Remember the enhancement protocols you developed for memory recovery? We found a way to reverse them." Elena stopped walking, the implications of Jennifer's words immediately clear. "You mean you can deliberately induce memory loss? Not just induce it, control it with precision. We can target specific traumatic memories while leaving the rest of a person's identity completely intact." Jennifer's excitement was evident as she pulled up brain scan images on her tablet. "It's the breakthrough that trauma treatment has been waiting for, the ability to heal psychological wounds without destroying the person who suffered them." The technology Jennifer was describing represented the positive application of memory manipulation that Elena had originally envisioned when she began her research. Instead of being used to create victims, it could genuinely help people overcome the worst experiences of their lives. But it also represented a new category of power that would require even more careful regulation than the coercive techniques used by Project Tabula Rasa. Who else knows about this? Marcus asked immediately, understanding the security implications. Just our core research team here at the ranch. We've been following the protocols you established. No external communication about breakthrough discoveries until we have full ethical review and security clearance. Jennifer led them to a secure laboratory where the new equipment was housed. But Elena, the potential applications are staggering. Veterans with PTSD, sexual assault survivors, children who've experienced abuse, we could give them their lives back. Elena studied the brain imaging equipment with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The technology before her represented everything she had hoped to achieve when she first began studying memory formation, but it also carried the same potential for abuse that had made Project Tabula Rasa so dangerous. Jennifer, I want you to lock down this research immediately. Full classification, restricted access, no communication outside our team until we can establish proper oversight. Elena's voice carried the authority of someone who had learned hard lessons about the responsibilities that came with revolutionary discoveries. This technology is too powerful to develop without international supervision. Are you sure? The medical applications could help millions of people, and the coercive applications could destroy millions more. We've seen what happens when memory manipulation technology is developed in secret. Elena gestured toward the window overlooking the valley where they had once fought for their lives against Blackwood's operatives. This time we're going to do it right from the beginning. Over the following weeks, Elena and Marcus worked with Catherine Walsh and the emerging ICSA framework to establish protocols for the ethical development of therapeutic memory modification. The breakthrough at the Double T Ranch became the first case study in how revolutionary neuroscience research should be conducted with full transparency, international oversight, and absolute commitment to preventing any coercive applications. Process was slow and sometimes frustrating, but it established precedents that would govern memory research for generations to come. Every aspect of the work was documented and reviewed by ethicists, human rights advocates, and survivors of memory manipulation abuse. The technology would eventually help countless trauma victims, but only after safeguards were in place to prevent its misuse. As autumn returned to the Colorado mountains, Elena found herself standing once again in the place where Marcus had first found her on that storm-swept road. The location had been marked with a small memorial to the victims of Project Tabula Rasa, a simple stone cairn that bore the names of everyone who had died as a result of illegal memory manipulation experiments. Any regrets? Marcus asked, joining her at the memorial as he had countless times over the past 2 years. About anything that's happened? Never. Elena reached for his hand, drawing strength from the connection that had saved her life and identity. About the path we're choosing going forward? Sometimes. It would be easier to focus on our own happiness and let other people fight these battles. But that's not who you are. That's not who we are, Elena corrected. I couldn't do any of this without you, Marcus. The advocacy work, the research, the rehabilitation programs, none of it would be possible if I didn't have someone I trusted completely watching my back. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. Then we keep moving forward, together. As they walked back toward the ranch house where their life together had truly begun, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The woman who had lost everything to memory manipulation had become the world's leading advocate for cognitive liberty. The rancher who had been facing bankruptcy had become a pioneer in ethical biotechnology. The isolated mountain valley where they had first found each other had become a beacon of hope for victims of technological abuse around the world. The past was healed, the present was secure, and the future stretched before them, full of challenges and possibilities they would face as partners in every sense of the word. Elena Chun had fought the ghost she couldn't remember and emerged victorious. But more importantly, she had discovered that some battles were worth fighting not for what you had lost, but for what others might yet be saved from losing: the memory. Wars were far from over, but they would be fought with honor, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to the principle that human consciousness was sacred territory that no government or organization had the right to violate. And at the center of that fight, on a ranch in the Colorado mountains, where love had conquered amnesia and hope had triumphed over despair, two people who had found each other in the darkness continued building a light that would shine for generations. To come, the woman with no memory had become the guardian of everyone else's memories. And that, Elena thought as she looked out over the valley that had become her true home, was exactly the kind of future worth remembering. 5 years had passed since that fateful night when Elena stumbled into Marcus's headlights, and the world had changed in ways neither of them could have imagined. The Chunthorne Institute for Cognitive Liberty, built on the foundations of their mountain ranch, had become the premier research facility for ethical memory science. Scientists from Harvard, Oxford, and Tokyo University came to the Colorado mountains to study under Elena's guidance, learning not just the technical aspects of memory manipulation, but the ethical frameworks that made such research morally defensible. The Institute's latest project was perhaps the most ambitious yet: a comprehensive database of every known victim of unauthorized memory manipulation, stretching back decades and spanning continents. Elena personally interviewed hundreds of survivors, documenting their experiences and ensuring that their stories would never be forgotten or denied. Each testimony was preserved in multiple formats and locations, creating an unassailable historical record of the crimes committed in the name of national security and scientific progress. Dr. Chun called Dr. Yuki Tanaka the Institute's newest research fellow as Elena made her morning rounds through the laboratory complex. "We've received confirmation from the International Criminal Court. The Blackwood trial is finally moving to the sentencing phase." Elena paused in her review of the overnight research reports. Harrison Blackwood had been fighting his conviction for war crimes and crimes against humanity for 3 years, his expensive legal team exhausting every possible appeal and procedural delay. But the evidence Elena had uploaded that night in the mine tunnels had proven insurmountable, supplemented by testimony from dozens of survivors and whistleblowers who had found the courage to come forward. "What's the prosecutor's recommendation?" Elena asked. "Life imprisonment without parole, plus individual sentences for each documented victim. If the court accepts all charges, he'll effectively receive over 800 life sentences." Dr. Tanaka's voice carried satisfaction mixed with somber recognition of the suffering those sentences represented. Elena nodded thoughtfully. No amount of punishment could undo the damage Blackwood had caused, but his conviction sent a clear message to anyone considering similar abuses of scientific knowledge. The days when researchers could hide behind national security classifications while torturing innocent people were definitively over. The sound of helicopter rotors approaching the Institute drew Elena's attention to the windows overlooking the landing pad Marcus had constructed to accommodate the constant stream of international visitors. Today's arrival was particularly significant. Dr. Amara Okafor, the Nigerian neuroscientist who had been developing memory restoration techniques for child soldiers traumatized by civil wars across Africa. Elena walked out to greet Dr. Okafor personally, a sign of respect for someone whose work had helped thousands of children reclaim their stolen childhoods. The African scientist emerged from the helicopter with the kind of quiet dignity that Elena had learned to associate with survivors who had transformed their pain into purpose. "Dr. Chun," Dr. Okafor said, clasping Elena's hands warmly. "Thank you for agreeing to collaborate on the pediatric memory protocols. The children we're treating deserve the best possible care." "The honor is mine, Dr. Okafor. Your work with trauma survivors has inspired our entire field." Elena led her guests toward the Institute's main building, passing the memorial garden where victims' names were engraved on stones arranged in spiraling patterns that caught the mountain sunlight. "How many children have you been able to help so far?" "Over 3,000 in the past 2 years alone. Children who were forced to commit violence, who had their family memories erased to make them more compliant soldiers, who were psychologically broken to serve the political ambitions of warlords." Dr. Okafor's voice carried both sadness and determination. "But with your neural mapping techniques, we're not just healing their trauma, we're giving them back their sense of self." The collaboration Elena was about to begin represented the cutting edge of therapeutic memory work. Unlike the coercive techniques developed by Project Tabula Rasa, these new protocols could help victims recover buried memories of love, family, and identity that had been suppressed by traumatic experiences. The work was painstaking and required extensive psychological support, but the results were transformative. As they toured the Institute's facilities, Elena pointed out innovations that had emerged from their unique approach to memory research. The empathy chambers where researchers experienced controlled memory simulations to better understand their patients' experiences. The validation laboratories where every technique was tested by volunteers who could provide real-time feedback about the psychological effects. The ethics review boards included not just scientists and lawyers, but survivors of memory manipulation, who could speak to the human cost of research decisions. "This is remarkable," Dr. Okafor observed as they entered the main research laboratory. "You've created an entirely new model for how sensitive research should be conducted." "We had to," Elena replied. "After what happened with Tabula Rasa, the old model of secret government research was completely discredited. Now everything we do is transparent, accountable, and subject to international oversight." The afternoon was spent in intensive planning sessions for the Pediatric Memory Restoration Project. Elena's team had developed sophisticated techniques for distinguishing between authentic memories and false ones implanted by trauma or manipulation, while Dr. Okafor's experience with child psychology provided crucial insights into how young minds processed memory recovery. Together, they were designing protocols that could help an entire generation of war-affected children reclaim their identities. As evening approached, Marcus joined them for dinner in the Institute's dining hall, where researchers from a dozen countries shared meals and ideas in an atmosphere of collaborative inquiry. The conversation ranged from technical discussions of neural pathway mapping to philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness and identity. "Elena," said Dr. Raj Patel, the Institute's chief ethicist, "I've been reviewing the latest reports from the ICS field teams. We're seeing increased activity in Eastern Europe, possible unauthorized memory research connected to human trafficking operations." Elena felt the familiar chill that accompanied news of ongoing abuses. Despite all their progress in establishing international protections, criminal organizations had proven adept at adapting memory manipulation techniques for their own purposes. Traffickers were using crude forms of memory suppression to control their victims, while organized crime syndicates employed more sophisticated techniques to ensure the loyalty of their operatives. "What kind of evidence are they finding?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the concern of someone who understood the personal cost of fighting such organizations. "Testimony from rescued trafficking victims who show signs of selective memory loss. Physical evidence of improvised neural interface equipment. Financial records suggesting purchases of banned neuroscience research materials." Dr. Patel's expression was grim. "It's not government-level sophistication, but it's effective enough to cause serious harm." Elena exchanged a glance with Marcus, reading the question in his eyes that matched her own thoughts. Their work at the Institute was vitally important, but somewhere in the world, people were suffering from the same kind of memory abuse that Elena had survived. The ICSA had field teams investigating such cases, but they lacked the specialized knowledge that came from personal experience with memory manipulation. "We should go," Elena said quietly. "Elena," Dr. Okafor interjected, "you've built something extraordinary here. Is it wise to risk that by returning to field work? The Institute will continue without us for a few weeks. We have excellent people here who can maintain the research programs." Elena looked around the table at the faces of colleagues who had become family over the past 5 years. "But there are victims out there who need our specific expertise. People who are living through the same nightmare I survived." Marcus reached for her hand under the table, the gesture conveying his support for whatever decision she made. "Where would we be going?" "Romania, most likely. The ICS, a team leader there, is Catherine's protege agent, Sarah Martinez. She's been requesting consultation on memory manipulation cases for months." Dr. Patel pulled up a secure tablet displaying classified reports. "They've identified what appears to be a network of clinics offering therapeutic memory adjustment to wealthy clients, but the procedures are being performed on unwilling subjects who've been trafficked for the purpose." Elena felt sick at the description. Her breakthrough research in memory encoding had been intended to help trauma victims heal, but criminal organizations had found ways to pervert those techniques into new forms of exploitation. The thought of innocent people being subjected to unauthorized memory manipulation filled her with the same protective fury that had driven her to fight Blackwood years earlier. "How soon can we leave?" Elena asked. "The ICS transport can take you to Bucharest within 18 hours, Dr. Patel replied. "But Elena, this isn't like the controlled environment we've created here. You'll be dealing with active criminal organizations who won't hesitate to kill anyone who threatens their operations." "I've dealt with that kind of threat before," Elena said simply. "And I survived it with help from someone who refused to let me face it alone." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Then we face this one together too." 2 days later, Elena and Marcus found themselves in a nondescript office building in downtown Bucharest, meeting with Agent Martinez and her international task force. The evidence they'd assembled painted a picture of sophisticated criminal enterprise that was using memory manipulation to create perfect victims, people who could be trafficked, exploited, and abused without retaining memories that could lead to prosecution of their captors. The operation appears to be centered in the Carpathian Mountains, about 2 hours north of here, Agent Martinez explained, indicating locations on a digital map. "We've identified at least 4 facilities masquerading as private psychiatric clinics, but satellite surveillance suggests they're actually processing centers for memory modification." Elena studied the intelligence reports with the analytical skills she'd developed during her years of legitimate research, but now applied to understanding criminal operations. The techniques being described were crude compared to what Project Tabula Rasa had achieved, but they were effective enough to cause permanent psychological damage to their victims. "How many people are we talking about?" Marcus asked. "Conservative estimates suggest several hundred victims over the past 2 years. Young women primarily, trafficked from impoverished regions and subjected to memory suppression before being sold into various forms of exploitation." Agent Martinez's voice carried the controlled anger of someone who had dedicated her career to fighting such crimes. The perfect victims from the traffickers' perspective, no memory of their families, their homes, or their lives before captivity. Elena felt physically ill at the description, remembering her own experience of waking up with no sense of identity or connection to the past. But where her amnesia had been temporary and ultimately reversible, these victims were being subjected to permanent psychological destruction for commercial purposes. "What's the plan?" Elena asked. coordinated raids on all 4 facilities simultaneously, with specialized medical teams standing by to begin immediate treatment of any victims we recover. Agent Martinez gestured to a timeline displayed on the mine conference room wall. But we need your expertise to assess the memory manipulation equipment and determine what kinds of restoration might be possible. Elena nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility being placed on her shoulders. The victims of this trafficking network would need immediate medical attention, but they would also need the kind of specialized memory recovery techniques that only Elena's team had fully mastered. "When do we move?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow night. The ICSA has legal authority to conduct these raids under the International Memory Protection Protocols, and the Romanian government has provided full cooperation." Agent Martinez's expression was determined but sobering. "But I want you both to understand the risks. These aren't government agents following rules of engagement. They're criminals who will kill anyone who threatens their profits." Elena thought of the children Dr. Okafor was helping in Africa, the veterans receiving treatment at institutes around the world, and the countless future victims who could be saved if this trafficking network was dismantled. The work she and Marcus had built together at their mountain institute was important, but it meant nothing if they weren't willing to fight for the people who needed their help most desperately. "Agent Martinez," Elena said firmly, "we didn't survive Project Tabula Rasa to hide in the safety of our laboratory while other people suffer the same abuses. We're ready to do whatever it takes to shut these operations down." As they prepared for what would become known as Operation Cognitive Freedom, Elena reflected on how far she had traveled from that terrified woman stumbling through a mountain storm. The path from victim to survivor to advocate to warrior had been neither straight nor easy, but each step had been taken hand in hand with someone who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Tomorrow they would face new dangers in service of people they had never met, driven by the knowledge that memory was too precious to be stolen and identity too sacred to be erased for profit. The woman who had once forgotten everything was now fighting to ensure that no one else would be forced to experience that particular form of hell. The battle for human consciousness continued, and Elena Chun intended to win it, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been made to forget who they truly were. Operation Cognitive Freedom launched at precisely 2:47 a.m. Romanian time, with synchronized assaults on 4 separate facilities hidden throughout the Carpathian Mountains. Elena and Marcus accompanied the strike team targeting the primary location. Accompanying the primary location, converted monastery that had been transformed into a sophisticated memory manipulation center while maintaining the facade of a spiritual retreat for troubled souls. The irony wasn't lost on Elena as she approached the ancient stone walls that had once sheltered monks seeking divine enlightenment, now perverted into a prison where human souls were deliberately darkened through technological torture. The monastery's bell tower still stood against the star-filled sky, but instead of calling the faithful to prayer, it now housed signal jammers and surveillance, equipment designed to keep victims isolated from the outside world. Thermal imaging shows approximately 30 heat signatures inside the main building, Agent Martinez reported through their tactical communications. 15 appear to be in the basement level likely victims. The rest are distributed throughout the upper floors. Elena checked her equipment one final time. Medical scanner for assessing neurological damage, portable memory analysis unit for evaluating the sophistication of any manipulation techniques they encountered, and emergency neural stabilization. Drugs for victims who might be experiencing active memory suppression. She had insisted on accompanying the assault team despite the protests of ICS administrators who considered her too valuable to risk in field operations. "Remember," Elena said to the medical team that would follow the tactical unit into the facility, "victims of memory manipulation may not recognize rescue as safety. They could be confused, hostile, or completely unresponsive. Don't assume cooperation just because we're trying to help them. Marcus adjusted his body armor and checked his sidearm skills he'd never imagined needing when he was a simple cattle rancher. Elena, if this goes badly, it won't, she interrupted firmly. We've trained for this, planned for every contingency, and we have the best team in the world backing us up. These criminals have been operating in shadows and secrecy. We're bringing them into the light. The assault began with the precision of a Swiss watch. ICSA tactical teams breached multiple entry points simultaneously while electronic warfare. Specialists disabled the facility's communications and security systems. Elena and Marcus followed the primary team through the monastery's main entrance, their footsteps echoing through corridors that had once witnessed centuries of peaceful contemplation. The first floor had been converted into administrative offices and consultation rooms designed to maintain the facade of legitimate psychiatric treatment. Expensive furniture, degrees from prestigious universities, and certificates of medical practice lined the walls, all carefully crafted lies meant to reassure wealthy clients that their requests for memory adjustment were being handled by qualified professionals. Dr. Chun called one of the tactical officers from a room lined with computer servers. You need to see this. Elena entered what appeared to be a central control room, where multiple monitors displayed real-time neural activity from subjects. Throughout the facility, the sophistication of the monitoring equipment revealed anything she had seen during her time with Project Tabula Rasa, suggesting that whoever was running this operation had access to cutting-edge neuroscience technology and expertise. They're monitoring brain activity in real time, Elena observed, studying the readouts with growing horror. Not just measuring it, actively manipulating it. These victims aren't just having their memories erased. They're being subjected to continuous psychological conditioning. The basement level revealed the true nature of the operation. 23 young women, ranging in age from 16 to 25, were housed in individual cells equipped with neural interface chairs that could deliver precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses directly to specific brain regions. Medical charts attached to each cell door documented the systematic destruction of the victims' identities, tracking the progressive elimination of family memories, personal histories, and psychological resistance to exploitation. Alana approached the first cell with trembling hands, seeing herself as she might have been if Marcus hadn't found her that night on the mountain road. The young woman inside, she couldn't have been older than 19, sat motionless in her chair, her eyes open but vacant, neural interface cables attached to her skull like technological parasites feeding on her consciousness. Can you hear me? Elena asked gently, kneeling beside the chair and beginning to disconnect the interface equipment. My name is Elena. I'm here to help you. The woman showed no response, her neural patterns on the monitoring equipment indicating active suppression of memory formation and recall. Elena quickly administered a neural stabilization injection while Marcus helped her move the victim to a medical stretcher brought by the rescue team. How long do you think she's been here? Marcus asked as they worked to free the next victim. Based on the degradation patterns in her neural activity, probably 6 to 8 months, Elena replied, her voice tight with controlled rage. Long. Enough for them to erase virtually everything about who she was before they brought her here. Cell after cell revealed similar horrors, young women whose minds had been systematically dismantled to create perfect victims for human trafficking. Some showed signs of recent memory manipulation and might be capable of recovery with intensive treatment. Others had been subjected to such extensive neural modification that restoration of their original identities might be impossible. Dr. Chun, Agent Martinez called from the facility's upper levels. We've captured the primary operators. They're asking to speak with you. Elena found herself face to face with Dr. Dmitry Volkov, a former colleague from the International Neuroscience community who had disappeared 3 years earlier after being accused of conducting unauthorized human experiments. His capture alongside 2 other researchers and a cadre of administrative staff marked the effective end of the trafficking operation. "Sarah," Dr. Volkov said, with the kind of familiar tone that made Elena's skin crawl, "I should have known you'd be involved in shutting us down. Still playing the moral crusader, I see. Still torturing innocent people for profit, I see," Elena replied coldly. "How many victims, Dmitri? How many young women have you destroyed to line your pockets?" "Destroyed? We were providing a service. Wealthy clients who wanted to forget traumatic experiences, family members dealing with difficult relatives, employers seeking more compliant workers. We gave them options that traditional psychiatry couldn't offer." Dr. Volkov's tone carried the same justification Elena had heard from Blackwood years earlier. The women were going to be trafficked anyway. We simply made them more adaptable to their circumstances. Elena felt Marcus tense beside her, recognizing the signs that her husband was restraining himself from violence against someone who spoke so casually about human suffering. She placed a calming hand on his arm while studying Dr. Volkov with the analytical detachment she'd learned to apply to the worst examples of human cruelty. "Adaptable," Elena repeated. "You mean traumatized beyond the ability to resist, confused, beyond the capacity to escape, broken beyond any hope of recovery. That's what you call adaptable. You of all people should understand the applications of memory manipulation technology. Your own research laid the groundwork for everything we've accomplished here." Dr. Volkov gestured toward the monitoring equipment that had been documenting his victims' suffering. "The only difference between us is that you limit yourself to helping people who can afford to pay for legitimate treatment, while we serve markets that traditional medicine ignores. The difference between us," Elena said with quiet fury, "is that I learned from my mistakes. You've turned yours into a business model." The interrogation of the captured operators revealed the scope of the criminal network they had dismantled. Over 400 victims had been processed through the 4 facilities over a 3-year period, with their modified memories and suppressed resistance, making them ideal candidates for various forms of exploitation. The clients included human traffickers, organized crime syndicates, and wealthy individuals seeking servants who would never remember enough of their past to cause problems. More disturbing was the revelation that Dr. Volkov's operation was just one node in a larger international network of criminal memory manipulation facilities. Similar operations were suspected in Southeast Asia, South America, and Eastern Africa, each one adapting Elena's original research to serve the demands of local criminal markets. "This is bigger than we thought," Agent Martinez admitted as dawn broke over the Carpathian Mountains, and the extent of their discovery became clear. "We're not just dealing with isolated criminal enterprises. We're looking at the emergence of an entire underground economy based on memory trafficking." Elena stood in the monastery's ancient courtyard, watching as the 23 rescued victims were loaded into medical transport vehicles for immediate evacuation to specialized treatment facilities. Each woman represented a family destroyed by her disappearance, a life stolen by technological cruelty, and a crime that demanded justice on an international scale. "What happens to them now?" Marcus asked, gesturing toward the medical transports. "They go to facilities equipped to handle memory restoration places like our institute, but specialized for trauma recovery. Some of them might recover significant portions of their original identities. Others—" Elena's voice trailed off as she considered the harsh reality that some forms of psychological damage couldn't be completely healed. "Others will need to build entirely new identities from whatever fragments remain." The success of Operation Cognitive Freedom led to a series of international raids over the following months, as ICSA teams worked to dismantle the global network of memory trafficking operations. Elena and Marcus found themselves traveling constantly to Bangkok, where they helped rescue victims of an organ harvesting ring that used memory suppression to prevent identification of the perpetrators, to São Paulo, where criminals were using crude memory manipulation to create child soldiers for drug cartels, to Lagos, where a sophisticated operation was providing memory modification services to corrupt government officials, seeking to eliminate inconvenient witnesses. Each operation reinforced Elena's understanding that her breakthrough research had opened a door that could never be completely closed. The technology she had developed to heal trauma victims was being perverted into new forms of exploitation, faster than international law could adapt to prevent it. The battle for cognitive liberty was no longer just about government overreach. It had become a war against criminal enterprises that saw human consciousness as a commodity to be manipulated for profit. 6 months after the Romanian operation, Elena stood before the UN General Assembly once again, this time calling for the establishment of a global memory crimes tribunal, with jurisdiction to prosecute trafficking in human consciousness. The proposal was ambitious and controversial, requiring nations to surrender aspects of their sovereignty to an international body with unprecedented authority over criminal justice matters. Memory trafficking represents a new category of crime against humanity, Elena told the assembled delegates. It is the theft of identity itself, the murder of personality while leaving the body alive. No national legal system is equipped to handle crimes that transcend borders, cultures, and traditional concepts of harm. The debate that followed was heated and complex. Some nations worried about the implications of international jurisdiction over their domestic legal systems. Others questioned whether memory manipulation truly warranted the creation of new categories of international law. But the evidence Elena presented testimonies from hundreds of victims, documentation of criminal networks spanning continents, and projections of exponential growth in memory trafficking operations ultimately proved persuasive. The Global Memory Crimes Tribunal was established by a vote of 147 to 23. With Elena appointed as its first chief technical advisor. The position would require her to leave the peaceful mountains of Colorado for extended periods, traveling the world to investigate memory crimes and testify in prosecutions of the perpetrators. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked as they prepared to return home to their institute after the UN vote. Ready to become the world's primary expert on hunting down memory traffickers? Elena considered the question while watching diplomatic delegations stream out of the General Assembly Hall, each carrying news of humanity's newest legal innovation back to their respective capitals. The work ahead would be dangerous emotionally, exhausting, and potentially endless as criminals adapted to each new legal and technological countermeasure. "I think about that scared woman you found on the mountain road 7 years ago," Elena said finally. She couldn't remember her own name, but she knew somehow that people were hunting her. "Now I hunt them instead. And now you're not hunting alone." Elena smiled, remembering the wooden robin that still sat on their mantelpiece in Colorado, the first symbol of hope Marcus had given her during those early days when neither of them understood what they were building together. "No, I'm definitely not hunting alone." The flight back to Denver gave Elena time to process the magnitude of the responsibility she had accepted. The Global Memory Crimes Tribunal would be humanity's first legal institution specifically designed to protect consciousness itself from technological violation. Its success or failure would determine whether the 21st century became an era of cognitive liberation or psychological enslavement. As their plane descended through the clouds toward the Rocky Mountains, Elena could see the lights of their institute twinkling in the valley below, a beacon of ethical research and victim recovery, surrounded by the wilderness where she had first learned to trust again. Tomorrow there would be new victims to treat, new research to conduct, and new battles to fight against those who sought to profit from human suffering. But tonight, she would sit by the fire with the man who had saved her life and helped her find her purpose, planning the next phase of their war against the forces that sought to steal human memory for profit. The woman who had forgotten everything had become the guardian of everyone's right to remember, and she intended to fight that battle until every last memory trafficker was brought to justice. That the wooden robin on their mantelpiece would witness many more evenings of planning and preparation, as Elena and Marcus continued building something that would outlast them both, a world where human consciousness was recognized as sacred territory that no government, corporation, or criminal organization had the right to violate. The battle for cognitive liberty was far from over, but Elena Chun had learned that some wars were worth fighting, not because victory was certain, but because defeat was unthinkable. And with Marcus beside her and the global community finally awakening to the threats facing human consciousness, she had never been more certain that they were fighting on the right side of history. 10 years after that stormy night on the mountain road, Elena found herself standing in the most unlikely of places, the former site of Project Tabula Rasa's primary research facility, now transformed into the International Memorial for Victims of Memory Crimes. The underground bunkers where she had once been tortured and experimented upon had been converted into exhibition spaces documenting the history of memory, manipulation, abuse, and celebrating the resilience of survivors who had reclaimed their lives. "It's strange being back here," Elena said to Marcus as they walked through corridors she remembered from her recovered memories of captivity. "Part of me expected to feel fear or anger, but mostly I just feel resolved, like coming full circle." The Quinto Memorial had been Elena's idea, proposed during her tenure as Chief Technical Advisor to the Global Memory Crimes Tribunal. Rather than demolishing the facility and pretending its horrors had never existed, she had advocated for preserving it, as a permanent reminder of what could happen when scientific advancement proceeded without ethical constraints. The transformation had taken 3 years and involved input from survivors, human rights advocates, and families of victims from around the world. Marcus paused in front of a wall displaying photographs of all known Project Tabula Rasa victims, his attention drawn to a section dedicated to researchers who had tried to expose the program and paid with their lives. "Do you think any of this would have happened if you hadn't fought back that night in the mine?" "Someone else would have fought back eventually," Elena replied, though her voice carried less certainty than her words suggested. "The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply people try to bury it." But privately, Elena knew that timing had been crucial. If she hadn't managed to upload the Tabula Rasa files when she did, if Marcus hadn't been there to protect her during those critical moments, if any number of variables had aligned differently, the program might have continued, operating for decades. The memorial they now walked through might never have existed, and thousands more victims might have suffered the same psychological destruction that she had barely survived. The memorial's centerpiece was an innovative, neural interface display that allowed visitors to experience simulated memory loss in a safe, controlled environment. The technology had been developed by Elena's team specifically for educational purposes, giving people who had never experienced amnesia a visceral understanding of what memory manipulation victims endured. The exhibit was controversial. Some critics argued that it trivialized genuine trauma, but survivor testimonials consistently supported its power to generate empathy and understanding. "Dr. Chun," called a familiar voice from across the memorial's main hall. Elena turned to see Dr. Jennifer Martinez, her former graduate student who now directed the memorial's educational programs. "The ceremony is about to begin. Are you ready?" Today marked the 10th anniversary of Operation Cognitive Freedom, and survivors from around the world had gathered to commemorate the event that had begun the global awakening to memory trafficking crimes. Elena would be delivering the keynote address to an audience that included government officials, human rights advocates, and dozens of survivors whose lives had been forever changed by criminal memory manipulation. As they made their way to the memorial's auditorium, Elena reflected on the decade of progress that had followed that first successful raid in Romania. The Global Memory Crimes Tribunal had prosecuted over 200 cases, resulting in convictions for memory trafficking networks on every continent. Dr. Dmitry Volkov was serving multiple life sentences in an international prison facility designed specifically for criminals who had committed crimes against human consciousness. More importantly, the legal frameworks established by the tribunal had been adopted by individual nations as domestic law, creating a comprehensive global system for preventing and prosecuting memory crimes. Universities now taught courses in cognitive ethics as a required component of neuroscience education. Medical licensing boards required ongoing training in memory protection protocols. International monitoring systems track the sale and distribution of neural interface equipment to prevent its misuse by criminal organizations. "Before I begin," Alina said as she took the podium before an audience of nearly 1,000 people, "I want to acknowledge that none of us should have had to be here. The crimes we commemorate today, the suffering we remember, the struggles we've overcome, all of it could have been prevented if humanity had been wiser about the power of the technologies we were creating." The audience was silent as Alina continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through the worst applications of memory science and emerged as its most effective advocate. "But we are here, and we have not merely survived, we have transformed our pain into purpose, our trauma into triumph, our victimization into victory for countless others who might have suffered as we did." Alina's speech traced the evolution of the global response to memory crimes, from the early days when such abuses were dismissed as science fiction to the current era, when cognitive liberty was recognized as a fundamental human right. She spoke about the children in Africa who had been restored to their families after being freed from memory-suppressed slavery, the trafficking victims who had rebuilt their identities with the help of advanced restoration techniques, the corrupt officials who had been held accountable for crimes they thought would remain forever hidden. "The technology that was once used to destroy us has become the tool of our liberation," Alina explained, gesturing toward screens displaying brain scan images from successful memory restoration procedures. "The same neural pathways that criminals exploited to steal our identities have been mapped and understood, allowing us to help victims reclaim what was taken from them." But Alina's most powerful message was about the future. The Global Memory Crimes Tribunal was now investigating new frontiers of cognitive crime, artificial intelligence systems designed to manipulate human memory through social media algorithms, corporate marketing techniques that exploited neurological vulnerabilities to implant false preferences and desires, and political propaganda campaigns that use subliminal memory modification to influence democratic processes. "The battle for cognitive liberty will never be completely won," Alina warned. "Technology will continue advancing, creating new opportunities for both healing and harm. Criminal organizations will adapt and evolve, finding new ways to exploit human consciousness for profit. Governments will face temptations to use memory manipulation for what they perceive as the greater good." After the ceremony, Elena and Marcus walked through the memorial's gardens, where plants from the home countries of known victims created a living testimony to the global scope of memory crimes. The Romanian roses representing the monastery operation, African marigolds honoring the child soldiers who had been freed from memory suppression, Asian cherry trees commemorating victims of organ trafficking rings that had used amnesia to prevent victim identification. "Elena," Marcus said as they paused beside a fountain whose flowing water was designed to represent the restoration of memory and identity, "do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if none of this had happened? If you had never lost your memory, if I had never found you on that road, if we had just lived quietly on the ranch without getting involved in all these larger battles?" Elena considered the question while watching the memorial's visitors' families learning about cognitive rights, students studying the history of memory crimes, survivors sharing their stories with researchers developing new protection techniques. The woman she had been before her memory loss seemed like a stranger now, someone whose potential had been limited by isolation and whose impact had been confined to a laboratory. "I think about that version of our lives sometimes," Elena admitted. "The quiet ranch, the simple research, the peaceful existence without constant travel and international crises, and life or death decisions about other people's suffering. And I realize that the woman who might have lived that life wouldn't have been capable of the love we've built together. She wouldn't have understood the value of the partnership we've created. She would have been too afraid to take the risks that have made our work meaningful." Elena reached for Marcus's hand, feeling the familiar strength and steadiness that had anchored her through a decade of global advocacy. "The trauma that brought us together also made us capable of the life we've built. I can't regret the path that led us here." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Dr. Yuki Tanaka, now the director of the Asian Regional Memory Crimes Prevention Center, who had urgent news from the tribunal's latest investigation. "Elena, Marcus, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've had a breakthrough in the Singapore case." The Singapore investigation involved one of the most sophisticated memory trafficking operations ever discovered. A network of corporate consultants who were using advanced neuromarketing techniques to implant false memories of positive experiences with specific products and brands. Unlike traditional advertising, which sought to influence preferences through conscious persuasion, these operations were directly modifying consumers' memories to create artificial loyalty that bypassed critical thinking entirely. "What kind of breakthrough?" Elena asked, immediately shifting into the analytical mode that had made her the world's leading expert in identifying memory manipulation techniques. "We've identified the source code for their neural advertising algorithms. It's based on your original memory encoding research, but modified to work through sensory input rather than direct neural interface." Dr. Tanaka's excitement was evident as she explained the technical details. "They found a way to trigger memory modification through specific combinations of visual, auditory, and olfactory stimuli delivered through normal advertising channels." The implications were staggering. If criminals had developed methods for modifying memory through ordinary advertising exposure, then potentially millions of people could have been subjected to unauthorized psychological manipulation without ever realizing it. The technology could be used to influence voting behavior, consumer choices, and social attitudes on a massive scale. "How widespread is this?" Marcus asked. "We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests deployment in at least 15 major metropolitan areas across 6 countries. The economic impact alone could be in the billions of dollars. Entire market sectors built on artificially implanted consumer preferences." Dr. Tanaka's expression was grim as she outlined the scope of the investigation. "But the social impact could be even more severe. Democratic processes, cultural values, fundamental human relationships, all of it could be subject to invisible manipulation." Elena felt the familiar surge of determination that had driven her through a decade of fighting memory crimes. Each victory seemed to reveal new forms of abuse, new applications of the technology she had helped create, new battles that needed to be fought to protect human consciousness from exploitation. "We'll need to convene an emergency session of the tribunal," Elena said, her mind already working through the legal and technical challenges of prosecuting criminals who could manipulate memory through environmental exposure. "And we'll need to develop detection methods that can identify neural advertising in real time." "There's something else," Dr. Tanaka added hesitantly. "The neural advertising network wasn't operating independently. We've found financial connections to several of the memory trafficking organizations you helped shut down over the past decade. This appears to be a coordinated effort to rebuild their capabilities using new techniques." Marcus and Elena exchanged a glance that conveyed their shared understanding of what this revelation meant. The war against memory crimes wasn't just continuing, it was escalating. The criminals they had fought for years were adapting, evolving, finding new ways to exploit human consciousness for profit. The battle that had begun with Elena's escape from Project Tabula Rasa had become a permanent struggle between those who sought to protect cognitive liberty and those who sought to exploit it. Then we adapt too, Elena said simply. We've built an international infrastructure for fighting memory crimes. We have legal frameworks, detection technologies, treatment protocols, and a global community of advocates and survivors. Whatever these criminals have developed, we'll find ways to counter it. As evening fell over the memorial site, Elena and Marcus found themselves back where their journey had begun, standing in a place where human consciousness had been violated, but where truth had ultimately prevailed over deception, justice over exploitation, and love over fear. The memorial would remain as a permanent reminder of the price of unchecked technological power, but also as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit when confronted with seemingly insurmountable challenges. The wooden robin is still on our mantelpiece at home, Marcus said as they prepared to leave for their next investigation. Still watching over our little piece of the world while we travel around trying to save everyone else's. Elena smiled, remembering the simple carved bird that had been Marcus's first gift to her, created during those early days when they were still learning to trust each other. It had become a symbol of hope emerging from darkness, of beauty created from broken pieces, of the possibility that two damaged people could build something together that was stronger than either could have achieved alone. When this is all over, Elena said, though she knew the battle for cognitive liberty would never truly be over, we'll go home to that wooden robin and the mountains and the ranch where we learn to love each other. But until then, ... Until then, we keep fighting, Marcus finished. Together, the woman who had once forgotten everything had become the world's memory of what humanity could achieve when it refused to surrender to those who sought to steal its most precious possession, the right to be authentically, completely, irrevocably human. And as Elena and Marcus walked into the night, ready to face whatever new challenges awaited them, the memorial behind them stood as proof that some things, truth, justice, love, and the indomitable human spirit could never be permanently erased. No matter how sophisticated the technologies arrayed against them, the battle for human consciousness would continue across continents and decades, but it would be fought by people who had learned that memory was not just personal history, but the foundation of freedom itself. And that was a lesson worth remembering, protecting, and passing on to future generations, who would face their own struggles to remain fully human in an increasingly technological world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.